Clara's knees hit marble first, then her shoulder, then the tray of champagne glasses exploding across 60 of Chicago's wealthiest guests. Nobody moved. Nobody except the one man in that room. Everyone was terrified to even look at Adrian Valenti. The city's most feared boss dropping to his knees beside a waitress nobody had bothered to learn the name of. 24 hours later, that same waitress held the keys to his entire empire in her trembling hands. Nobody warned her that surviving Adrian Valenti's world would be far more dangerous than collapsing on his restaurant floor ever was. Comment your city below. I read every single one, and subscribe so you don't miss where this goes. Clara Bennett's alarm went off at 5:10 in the morning, and she was already awake before it rang. She had learned over the last 3 years that lying in bed one extra minute was a luxury she couldn't afford. Every minute mattered. Every minute either belonged to her mother's medication, her brother's tuition, or the mountain of debt that grew a little taller every month, no matter how hard Clara worked to keep it down. She sat up in the dark, pressed her palms against her eyes, and whispered the same thing she whispered every morning. One more day. Just get through one more day. By 6, she was dressed in the gray blazer of the Linfield Hotel, walking 3 blocks in the cold, because she couldn't justify the cost of a rideshare. By 7, she was behind the front desk, sorting through a stack of vendor invoices that should have been someone else's responsibility. Clara. Patrice Whitfield's voice cut through the lobby like a blade. She was the hotel's operations manager, a woman who smiled at guests and treated her own staff like inconveniences. The Hendricks reservation is wrong again. 3rd floor thinks they're booked for 2 nights. Corporate thinks it's 3. Clara didn't ask who made the mistake. She already knew it wasn't her. She also knew that saying so would accomplish nothing. I'll fix it right now, she said instead. You'd better. I don't have time to babysit paperwork today. Clara swallowed the words rising in her throat and turned back to her computer screen. She fixed the Hendricks reservation in 4 minutes. She fixed a billing error for a guest in room 412 in 6 minutes. She fixed a broken keycard system that wasn't even part of her job description because the IT contractor wouldn't arrive until Thursday, and guests were standing at the desk getting angrier by the second. By noon, she had eaten nothing but half a granola bar she kept in her desk drawer for emergencies. She told herself it wasn't an emergency yet. At 2:45, her phone buzzed. It was her brother Tyler. Hey, Claire. His voice had that particular tightness she'd come to recognize immediately. I know you're at work. I'm sorry. It's just the tuition portal is showing a hold on my account. They said if it's not paid by Friday, I get dropped from 2 classes. Clara closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Just one. How much? Boom. 1,400. I'll figure it out. Claire, I don't want you to... I said I'll figure it out, Ty. Her voice came out sharper than she intended, and she immediately softened it. I'm sorry. I'm just tired. I'll take care of it, I promise. Go to class. She hung up and sat very still behind the front desk, doing math in her head that never seemed to balance. No matter how many times she ran the numbers. Mother's medication. Tyler's tuition. Rent due in 9 days. The restaurant paycheck wouldn't hit until next Tuesday. She would find a way. She always found a way. That was the quiet tragedy of Clara Bennett. She had spent so many years finding a way for everyone else that nobody ever stopped to ask if she had a way for herself. At 3:30, Patrice stopped by the desk one more time. You're covering the Aurelia tonight too, aren't you? The private event? Yes. Good. Try not to look like you haven't slept. We can't have hotel staff looking exhausted in front of important people. Clara nodded because nodding took less energy than arguing, and Patrice walked away already checking her phone, already forgetting Clara existed the moment she was out of eyeline. That was the first mini collapse of the day, not physical, but something quieter, something that lived behind Clara's ribs. The specific ache of being seen only as a function. A desk. A fixer. A person whose exhaustion was inconvenient rather than concerning. She clocked out of the hotel at 4 o'clock and walked 6 blocks to the Aurelia, Chicago's most exclusive restaurant where she worked the dinner shift 4 nights a week. She hadn't eaten since the granola bar. She told herself she had grabbed something in the staff room before the event started. She never did. The Aurelia was the kind of restaurant where a bottle of wine cost more than Clara's entire grocery budget for a month, where men in tailored suits ordered dishes they wouldn't finish, and women wearing jewelry worth more than Clara's yearly salary complained if their water wasn't cold enough. Deborah Wexler ran the front of house with the same warmth as a closed fist. "You're 3 minutes late," Deborah said the second Clara walked in. "I came straight from the hotel." "I don't care where you came from. Tonight is the Ashford account. Half the guest list controls more money than this entire city block. If anything goes wrong, it comes out of your check. Are we clear?" "We're clear." Clara tied her apron with hands that had started almost imperceptibly to tremble. She noticed it. She ignored it. She had learned to ignore a great many things about her own body over the last 3 years. The first hour of the private event went smoothly enough. Clara moved between tables with practiced efficiency, refilling glasses, clearing plates, absorbing the low murmur of important people discussing important things that had nothing to do with her. Then, Mia, the newest waitress, dropped an entire tray of appetizers directly in front of a table of investors. The room didn't stop, but Deborah's face did something that made Clara's stomach drop. She watched Deborah cross the floor toward the young girl, watched Mia's eyes fill with panic, watched the whole scene about to become a very public humiliation. Clara stepped in before she could think better of it. "That one's on me," she said smoothly, already crouching to help clean up. "I asked Mia to switch trays with me, and I gave her the wrong one. My mistake." It wasn't true. But Mia was 19, and this was her first serious job, and Clara remembered exactly what it felt like to be young and terrified, and one mistake away from losing everything. Deborah's eyes narrowed clearly, not believing a word of it, but with guests watching, she had no choice but to let it go. Fix it. Now. Clara fixed it. She always fixed it. That was mini-climax number 1 of the night, and it cost her something invisible, a little more of the reserve she didn't know she was running out of. By 8 o'clock, the dizziness had started. It came in small waves at first, a flicker at the edge of her vision, a strange lightness in her fingertips. She blamed it on the heat of the kitchen on the 14-hour day, on the stress of Tyler's tuition sitting unpaid in the back of her mind like a stone she was carrying uphill. She kept moving. Around 8:20, the whispers started near the entrance. "He's here. I heard he never comes to these things personally. Don't make eye contact, I mean it." Clara had heard the name Adrian Valenti spoken in the same hushed, careful tone dozens of times since she'd started working at the Aurelia. He was one of the restaurant's silent investors, though everyone in the city knew investor was a polite word for something much larger, much darker, much more dangerous. Men who worked for him didn't talk about him directly. They just lowered their voices when his name came up the way people lower their voices around things they're afraid might be listening. Nobody knew exactly what Adrian Valenti controlled. Some said shipping. Some said real estate. Some said things that had nothing to do with legitimate business at all. What everyone agreed on was this: you did not want his attention, and you certainly did not want his displeasure. Clara had never seen him in person. She'd built an image in her mind anyway. Cold eyes, cruel mouth, the kind of man who destroyed people the way other men shook hands. She didn't have time to think about him further because Deborah was suddenly at her elbow, gripping her arm hard enough to leave a mark. "Table 6 needs their next course out in 4 minutes. Not 5. 4. Do you understand me?" "I understand." "And smile. You look like you're about to be sick." Clara did not tell Deborah that she genuinely felt like she was about to be sick. She simply nodded, picked up the tray of plates waiting in the kitchen, heavier than it should have felt, so much heavier than it should have felt, and walked back out onto the floor. The room tilted, just slightly, just for a second. She blinked hard and kept walking, weaving between tables of people who didn't look up from their conversations, carrying a tray that suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds, her vision narrowing at the edges into something soft and gray. She told herself 10 more steps. Just 10 more steps, and you can set this down. She made it 7. The noise of the room disappeared first. The clinking glasses, the low laughter, the string quartet playing something elegant in the corner. Then the light seemed to fold inward, and the last thing Clara Bennett remembered was the tray slipping from her hands. The crash was enormous. Glass and china exploding against marble. A gasp rippling through 60 of Chicago's wealthiest guests. And then Clara's body followed the tray down, collapsing in the middle of the dining room, with a sound that silenced every conversation in the building. For one full second, nobody moved. Then chaos. "Oh my God. Someone call an ambulance. Is she breathing?" Deborah's voice rose above the panic, sharp and furious, rather than concerned. "Get her up. Get her out of here. This cannot be happening in front of the Ashford account." But before anyone else could reach her, before Deborah could grab her arm and drag her off the floor like an inconvenience to be hidden, a man was already on his knees beside Clara's collapsed body. He hadn't rushed. He hadn't panicked. He had simply moved through the frozen crowd like the chaos didn't apply to him, and knelt down on marble in a suit that probably cost more than Clara's rent, and pressed 2 fingers gently to the side of her throat. The entire room went silent again, but for a different reason this time. Because the man kneeling over the collapsed waitress was Adrian Valenti, and Adrian Valenti did not kneel for anyone. "Someone get water," he said, and his voice was quiet, but it carried through the room with a weight that made even Deborah stop talking. "Now!" "Mr. Valenti, I am so sorry, we will have her out of your sight immediately," Deborah started. "Nobody touches her." Adrian didn't even look up at Deborah when he said it. His eyes stayed on Clara's pale face. "Get water." Someone ran. Clara's eyelids fluttered. The world came back to her in fragments, cold marble beneath her, a low murmur of voices, and a face close to hers that she didn't recognize. Dark eyes. A jaw set, with something that looked strangely like concern, rather than annoyance. "Hey." His voice was low, steady, meant only for her. "Don't try to sit up yet. You fainted. You're safe." Clara's voice came out cracked. Humiliation flooded through her faster than the dizziness had. "I'm so sorry, I need to get up. I have tables." "You don't have tables. You have a body that's telling you it's been ignored for far too long." He said it simply, without judgment, the way someone states a fact rather than delivers a lecture. "When did you last eat?" Clara blinked at him, disoriented. That's not important right now." "When?" Something in the single word made her answer honestly, the way people sometimes tell strangers things they'd never admit to people who actually know them. "This morning, a granola bar." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked for just a moment genuinely angry, though not at her. Deborah appeared at his shoulder again, her voice pitched high with anxiety. "Mr. Valenti, please let us handle this. I can have her replaced immediately. I apologize for the disruption to your evening." Adrian finally looked up, and whatever expression crossed his face made Deborah take an actual step backward. "Replaced." He repeated the word slowly, like he was testing its weight. "This woman collapsed from exhaustion in your restaurant, and your first instinct is to talk about replacing her." "I only meant—" "I know exactly what you meant." The room had gone so quiet that Clara could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She tried again to sit up, and this time Adrian helped her, one hand firm and careful under her shoulder, steadying her without making it feel like pity. "I need my job," Clara said quietly, the fear finally cutting through the fog in her mind. This was it. This was the moment everything fell apart. Whatever mercy this man was showing her right now, Deborah would fire her the second he left the building. "Please, I have people depending on me. I can't lose this." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Really looked at her. Not the way men usually looked at waitresses, sizing them up or dismissing them, but the way you look at someone when you're trying to understand something important about them. "What's your name?" "Clara. Clara Bennett." "Clara." He said it like he was committing it to memory. "You collapsed because you've been carrying more than one person should carry alone for longer than anyone should have to. That's not a flaw. That's not weakness. That's what happens when good people get taken advantage of by people who never once ask if they're okay. Clara didn't know what to say to that. Nobody had ever said anything like that to her before. Not her mother, not Tyler, not a single manager in 3 years of working herself to exhaustion for people who barely remembered her name. The paramedics arrived a few minutes later, called by someone in the kitchen, despite Deborah's objections. They checked Clara's vitals, confirmed what Adrian had already guessed. Low blood sugar, dehydration, exhaustion, nothing life-threatening, but a clear warning sign her body had been sending for longer than she'd admitted. They recommended rest and food and told her firmly to see a doctor if the dizziness continued. Through all of it, Adrian didn't leave her side. When Clara was finally steady enough to stand, humiliation crashed over her all over again. 60 guests, 60 of the wealthiest, most influential people in Chicago, and she had collapsed in the middle of their dinner like some kind of spectacle. "I am so sorry," she said again to the room, to Deborah, to anyone who might be listening. "This won't happen again. I promise I'll be back on shift tomorrow." "No," Adrian said. "You won't." Clara's stomach dropped. This was it. He was firing her himself in front of everyone, and somehow that felt so much worse than if Deborah had done it. "Please," Clara started. "I really do need this job if there's any way." "You're not being fired, Clara." Adrian's voice softened, just slightly, just enough for her to hear it. "You're going home. Tonight. And you're going to eat something, and you're going to sleep, and tomorrow someone is going to call you about something that has nothing to do with waiting tables." Clara stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "I don't understand." "You will." He straightened up, and just like that, the warmth in his expression was gone, replaced by the cold authority that had made an entire room go silent when he walked in. He turned to Deborah, who had gone pale. "This woman does not work another shift in this restaurant. Is that understood?" Of course, Mr. Valenti, whatever you—" "I'm not finished." His eyes moved slowly across the room, across the staff who had frozen at their stations, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "How many of the people working here tonight have eaten a full meal today?" Silence. "That's what I thought." He turned back to Clara one final time, and for just a moment the coldness softened again, reserved only for her. "Go home, Clara. Rest. You've spent years keeping everyone else's world together." His voice dropped lower, quieter, meant only for her ears. "Now I'm giving you the chance to build your own." He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the private room where the Ashford dinner would somehow impossibly continue, as though nothing had happened. Clara stood frozen in the middle of the dining room, her apron still tied around her waist, 60 pairs of eyes still watching her. And she had absolutely no idea what had just happened to her life. She went home that night in a daze, replaying his words over and over. Her mother was already asleep when she arrived, the small apartment quiet except for the hum of the ancient radiator. Clara sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, still in her uniform, too wired and too frightened to change. Tyler called around 11, worried because she hadn't answered his earlier texts. "Claire, you okay? You sound weird." "I fainted at work tonight." "What?" "Claire, I'm fine. I'm home. I'm fine." She pressed her palm to her forehead, exhaustion and adrenaline fighting for control of her body. "Something strange happened, Ty. I don't know what it means yet." "What kind of strange?" Clara hesitated. Saying it out loud felt dangerous, like speaking a wish before it had the chance to come true or fall apart. "I think I might have just lost my job. Or gained one. I honestly don't know which." She didn't sleep much that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, the calm intensity of him kneeling over her, the fury in his eyes when Deborah suggested replacing her, the strange gentleness in his voice when he told her to go home and eat something. "You've spent years keeping everyone else's world together. Now I'm giving you the chance to build your own." What did that even mean? Was it kindness? Pity? Something else entirely? Clara had learned the hard way that when powerful men noticed you, it rarely meant something good. She fell asleep sometime near dawn, still in her work clothes, still turning his words over in her mind, like a coin she couldn't decide whether to spend. The phone rang at 9:47 the next morning. Clara startled awake, heart pounding, certain for one disoriented second that it was Deborah calling to fire her formally, to make it official, to tell her never to set foot in the Aurelia again. The voice on the other end was not Deborah's. It was calm, professional, entirely unfamiliar. "Good morning. Is this Clara Bennett?" "Yes, this is Clara. My name is Marcus Reyes. I work directly for Mr. Adrian Valenti. He asked me to reach out to you this morning regarding a matter of some importance. Would you be available to meet with him today?" Clara sat up so fast, the room spun again, though this time from shock rather than exhaustion. Meet with him? About what? He'd prefer to discuss the details in person, I can tell you this much. There was something almost amused in Marcus's voice, like he already knew how strange this must sound to her. As of 6 o'clock this morning, Mr. Valenti became the sole owner of the Aurelia. The previous ownership group has been bought out entirely. Effective immediately, the management structure is being rebuilt from the ground up. Clara's mouth went dry. The whole restaurant? He bought the whole restaurant. Overnight, yes. A pause. Ms. Bennett, Mr. Valenti would like to offer you a position. He was quite specific that I use the word offer, not favor. He wants to be very clear that this is not charity. What position? Marcus's answer landed in Clara's chest like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through every certainty she'd built her life around. General manager of the entire restaurant group. For a long moment, Clara couldn't speak at all. That's not possible, she finally managed. I'm a waitress. I don't have that kind of experience. There has to be some mistake. Mr. Valenti doesn't make mistakes about people, Ms. Bennett. That's not something I'm authorized to explain further. He'd prefer to tell you himself. Can you be at the address I'm about to text you by 2 o'clock this afternoon? Clara looked around her small apartment, the peeling paint in the corner, the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter. Her mother's medication bottles lined up like small soldiers on the windowsill. 9 days until rent was due. $1,400 Tyler needed by Friday. A life built entirely out of barely holding on. And somewhere across the city, a man everyone feared was offering her something that made absolutely no sense. Yes, she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. I'll be there. She hung up the phone and sat perfectly still for a long moment, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every instinct she'd built over 28 years of disappointment told her this was too good to be true, that there had to be a catch, that men like Adrian Valenti did not hand waitresses the keys to empires out of nothing but kindness. But another part of her, a small, exhausted, desperate part she'd been silencing for years, whispered something different. What if this is the moment everything finally changes? She had no idea, sitting there in her quiet apartment with the morning light slanting through thin curtains, just how right and how dangerous that feeling was about to become. At 2 o'clock exactly, Clara stood outside a glass office tower in the financial district, smoothing down the only blazer she owned that didn't have coffee stains on the sleeve, trying to steady her breathing before she walked through the doors. The receptionist on the top floor didn't ask her name. She simply looked up, smiled, and said, "He's expecting you, Ms. Bennett. Go right in." Clara pushed open the heavy office door, and there he was. Adrian Valenti, standing at a window with his back to her, hands in his pockets, looking out over a city that she was quickly beginning to understand belonged to him in more ways than one. He turned when the door clicked shut. "You came," he said, and something in his expression looked almost relieved. "You bought the restaurant," Clara said, still trying to make the sentence make sense in her own mouth. "Overnight, because I fainted. I bought the restaurant because it was badly run by people who had no idea what they had in front of them." Adrian gestured toward a chair across from his desk, though Clara remained standing, arms crossed, bracing herself. "You are not the reason I bought it. You're the reason I know exactly what to do with it now that I have. I don't understand any of this." "Sit down, Clara." His voice wasn't harsh, but it carried the same quiet authority she'd heard the night before. "I'll explain everything. And then you're going to tell me exactly what conditions you want, because I have a feeling you're not going to accept this without a fight." Clara sat. She didn't yet know that this single decision, sitting down in that office agreeing to hear him out, was about to unravel everything she thought she understood about her own life, about the man in front of her, and about the dangerous, complicated world she was walking into, with her eyes wide open for the very first time. Outside the window behind him, the city stretched on indifferent and enormous, completely unaware that somewhere inside that glass tower, an invisible woman was about to become impossible to ignore, and that her sudden visibility had already caught the attention of people who would do anything to make sure she never got the chance to matter at all. Clara sat in the chair across from Adrian's desk, her hands folded tightly in her lap, waiting for the catch she was certain was coming. "Before you say anything else," she said, "I need you to understand something. I've had people offer me things before, favors, opportunities. They always want something back. So whatever this is, whatever you think you're offering me, I need to know what you actually want." Adrian didn't sit down right away. He walked slowly around the desk instead, leaning against the edge of it, arms crossed, studying her the way a man studies a puzzle he's already solved but wants to watch someone else work through. "I don't want anything from you, Clara." "Everybody wants something. Fair enough." A faint, almost approving smile crossed his face. "I want the restaurant to stop losing money because it's run by people who don't care whether their staff eats lunch. I want a general manager who notices when a 19-year-old girl is about to be humiliated in front of investors and steps in to protect her even though it isn't her job. I want someone who fixes things because she can't stand watching them stay broken." He paused. "I watched you do that last night right before you collapsed. You lied to Deborah to protect a girl you barely know. That's not something I can teach someone. That's something you already are." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, half embarrassment, half something else she didn't have a name for yet. "That doesn't mean I know how to run a restaurant group. You've been running one for months. Nobody just gave you the title." His eyes didn't leave hers. "I had someone pull the internal records this morning. Every scheduling conflict resolved in the last year, you. Every vendor dispute quietly handled before it became a problem, you. Every time inventory numbers didn't match and somebody needed to stay late fixing the books without pay, you." He let that sit in the air between them. "The people who had the title were coasting on your work for a year and taking the credit for it. I'm simply putting the right name on the door." Clara opened her mouth to argue and found for the first time in longer than she could remember that she didn't have a rebuttal ready. She'd spent so many years being invisible that having someone list her own labor back to her felt disorienting, almost like hearing a stranger describe her own life more clearly than she'd ever allowed herself to see it. "Why do you care?" she asked quietly. "You're a stranger. You knelt on a restaurant floor for a waitress you'd never met. Men like you don't do that." Something shifted behind Adrian's eyes, a flicker of old pain quickly folded away the way a man closes a door before anyone can see what's behind it. "Because I know what it looks like when someone's been carrying too much for too long and nobody's bothered to ask if they're okay." His voice had gone lower, rougher around the edges. "I've seen what happens to people when nobody catches them in time. I wasn't going to let that happen in my own restaurant in front of my own eyes when I had the power to do something about it." Clara didn't push further. Whatever memory had crossed his face just then wasn't hers to demand. Not yet, maybe not ever. But she filed it away, the first proof that Adrian Valenti was not simply the cold name whispered through kitchens and hallways. There was a person underneath the reputation, and that person had just shown her something real. "All right," she said slowly. "If I'm actually considering this, and I haven't said yes, I have conditions." "I told Marcus you would." Adrian almost smiled. "Go ahead." "Nobody works a 14-hour shift without a real break again. Not the servers, not the kitchen staff, not the hosts. I don't care what the old policy was. Done. Employees get a real meal during their shift. Not a granola bar in a desk drawer. An actual meal provided by the restaurant. Done. If someone makes a mistake, they get corrected privately, not humiliated in front of guests. That includes management yelling at staff on the floor where customers can hear it. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly like he was recalling something specific. Done. Anything else? Clara hesitated, and then said the thing she almost hadn't planned to say out loud. I decide who stays on my management team, including whether Deborah Wexler keeps her position. For the first time since she'd walked into the office, Adrian actually laughed short, surprise genuine. Now that, he said, I was hoping you'd ask for. Clara felt something loosen in her chest, some knot she hadn't realized she'd been carrying since the moment Marcus Reyes called her that morning. This wasn't charity. This wasn't a man handing a broken woman a shiny object to keep her quiet. This was a negotiation between equals, and for the first time in years, Clara Bennett was setting the terms of her own life, instead of scrambling to survive someone else's. There's a salary attached to the position, Adrian said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the desk toward her. I'd like you to look at the number before you say anything else. Clara looked down at the paper, and the number stared back up at her, and for one long silent moment, she simply couldn't breathe. It was more than 4 times what she made combined between the hotel and the restaurant. It was rent paid on time for the first time in 3 years. It was her mother's medication without the monthly panic of choosing between the pharmacy and the electric bill. It was Tyler's tuition without a single missed payment ever again. This can't be right, she whispered. It's right. And it's not negotiable downward, only upward, if you decide you're worth more once you're in the role for 6 months, which I suspect you will be. Adrian's voice softened. Clara, nobody is going to save you from a life you can save yourself from if someone just gives you the tools to do it. That's what I'm offering, not a rescue, a door. Clara stared at the number on the page until it blurred, and when she looked back up at him, there were tears standing in her eyes that she absolutely refused to let fall in front of this man. I need to think about it. Take the night, Adrian said. But Clara, don't think too long. There are people who are going to hear about this before the sun sets today, and not all of them are going to be happy about it. Clara didn't understand what he meant by that. Not yet. But the warning settled into her stomach like a stone dropped into still water, and she carried it with her all the way home. She called her mother first. Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to sit down. Eleanor Bennett's voice crackled through the phone, thin with the fatigue of chronic illness that never fully let go. Clara, honey, you're scaring me. It's good news, I promise, I think. Clara laughed, disbelieving her own words even as she said them. I got offered a new job, a real one, general manager of an entire restaurant group. There was a pause on the other end, and then quietly, Eleanor said, Clara Bennett, are you telling me the truth, or are you just trying to make your mother feel better? I'm telling you the truth. How much? Clara told her. The silence that followed stretched so long that Clara actually checked to see if the call had dropped. Mom, I'm here. Eleanor's voice cracked. Clara, do you have any idea how long I've prayed for something like this to happen for you? You've given up everything for this family. Everything. And nobody ever... Mom, don't cry. You're going to make me cry, and I'm standing in the middle of the sidewalk. Let me cry. I've earned it. Eleanor laughed and sobbed at the same time. My girl, my smart, stubborn, exhausted girl. Take the job, Clara. Take it and don't look back. Tyler's reaction when she called him next was quieter, heavier, with a guilt Clara recognized immediately because she'd worn it herself for years. This is because of my tuition, isn't it? Tyler said. You've been stressed about the $1,400, and now suddenly you have some new job that pays 4 times what you were making. Claire, if you did something... I didn't do anything, Ty. I fainted at a fancy restaurant, and the owner turned out to be a decent human being, underneath a scary reputation. That's the whole story. That doesn't sound like a whole story. That sounds like the beginning of one. Clara didn't have an answer for that, because some small, quiet part of her agreed with him completely. She said yes the next morning. Marcus Reyes met her at the Aurelia before the doors opened to the public, holding a tablet and a stack of paperwork, wearing the expression of a man who'd clearly done this kind of onboarding before, though never quite like this. "Congratulations, Ms. Bennett. Mr. Valenti asked me to walk you through the transition personally." He handed her a keycard heavier in her palm than she expected, both literally and otherwise. "This opens every door in the building. Kitchen, offices, wine cellar, the private dining rooms. As of this morning, there isn't a single door in this restaurant that isn't yours." Clara turned the keycard over in her hands, and the reality of it hit her all at once. Not gradually the way she'd expected, but like a wave breaking over her head. "Where's Deborah?" she asked. "Waiting in the office. Mr. Valenti thought you should be the one to have that conversation." Clara's stomach tightened. Whatever satisfaction she might have imagined feeling in this moment evaporated the second she pushed open the office door and saw Deborah Wexler sitting stiffly in the chair Clara herself had occupied only a day earlier, her face pale, her hands twisted tightly together in her lap. "So it's true," Deborah said before Clara could speak. "The waitress who fainted on my floor is my new boss." "Deborah, don't." Deborah's voice cracked down the middle, fury and humiliation tangled together. "I have worked in this industry for 15 years. 15 years, Clara. And you've been here, 11 months, and somehow you're the one sitting behind that desk now." Clara took a slow breath, remembering every unfair moment Deborah had ever put her through. Every sharp word, every impossible demand, delivered with no regard for whether Clara had eaten, slept, or had a single minute to herself. It would have been so easy to let all of that fury out in this moment. It would have felt, for about 30 seconds, incredibly satisfying. She didn't. "I'm not going to pretend the last year was easy working under you," Clara said instead, steady and calm. "You made choices that hurt people who couldn't defend themselves. Mia, half the junior staff. Me more times than I can count." She paused. "But I'm not interested in destroying you the way you sometimes seemed interested in destroying the people beneath you. I'm offering you a choice. You can stay on as a floor supervisor, a real demotion, yes, but a job with the new policies in place, meal breaks, no more screaming at people in front of guests. Or you can leave with a severance package Mr. Valenti has already authorized, generous enough that you won't struggle finding something else." Deborah stared at her, clearly having expected cruelty and finding none. "Why would you do that? Give me a choice at all." "Because somebody should have given me one back when I needed it." Clara's voice was quiet, but absolutely certain. "I'm not going to become the kind of person who forgot what it felt like to have no power the second I got some." Deborah left without answering that day, saying she needed time to think. She didn't come back for 3 days, and when she finally did, she chose the severance quietly without another confrontation, and Clara let her go without a single moment of gloating. That was the first mini-climax of Clara's new life, and it taught her something important. Power tested you fastest, not in how you treated your enemies, but in how you treated the people who no longer had power over you. The next several weeks moved so fast, Clara sometimes felt like she was watching her own life from just outside her body. She restructured scheduling from the ground up, building in real breaks, real staff meals, rotating shifts, so nobody worked more than 10 days straight. She personally interviewed every remaining manager, keeping the ones who treated staff with basic decency, replacing the ones who didn't. She sat down with Mia, the 19-year-old, who dropped the tray that first terrible night, and told her directly that her job was safe, that mistakes were part of learning, that nobody was going to humiliate her for being new again. Mia cried in the office that day, quietly gripping Clara's hand like a lifeline. "Nobody's ever stuck up for me like that before," Mia said. "Not once. Not ever." "Well," Clara squeezed her hand back. "Get used to it." Word moved through the staff quickly. The new general manager wasn't just tolerable, she was different. Genuinely different, in a way that made people who'd been quietly miserable for years start showing up to work like they actually wanted to be there. Turnover dropped. Sick days dropped. The energy in the kitchen shifted from tense and clipped to something almost collaborative, and the numbers slowly, undeniably started to climb. Within a month, revenue was up 11%. Within 6 weeks, it was up 19%. Regular guests began commenting on the change in atmosphere without quite understanding what had caused it, only that the Aurelia suddenly felt like somewhere they wanted to return to, rather than simply somewhere they were seen. Adrian noticed. Of course he noticed. He started showing up more frequently, not hovering, never interfering, but present in a way that made Clara's pulse do something strange and unfamiliar every time she saw him walk through the door. He'd sit at the same corner table, order the same simple meal, and watch the floor with an expression Clara couldn't quite decode. "You're staring," she told him one evening, setting down 2 waters at his table, without being asked, an old habit from her waitressing days she couldn't quite break. "I'm observing." A faint smile. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "You changed this place in 6 weeks. I've owned businesses for 15 years, Clara. I know what it looks like when someone is simply competent, and I know what it looks like when someone actually cares. This..." He gestured around the restaurant at the staff, moving with an ease that hadn't existed a month ago, at the low, comfortable hum of guests who felt genuinely welcome. "This is what caring looks like when it's given room to work." Clara felt her face heat, and she busied herself straightening the silverware at his table rather than answer directly. "How's your mother?" Adrian asked, and the question caught her off guard because she hadn't told him much about her family at all. "You looked into my mother. I looked into what conditions might be keeping a talented woman trapped in survival mode instead of living the life she was capable of. Your mother's medical situation came up." He held up a hand before she could object. "I didn't do anything with the information, Clara. I simply wanted to understand what you were carrying, that's all." Clara sat down across from him without fully deciding, to some instinct pulling her into the chair. "She's better," Clara admitted. "Being able to actually pay for her medications on time instead of choosing which pharmacy bill to skip, it's made a difference. She sleeps better, she worries less, which means I worry less." "Good. Why does that matter to you?" Adrian considered the question for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable in the low restaurant light. "Because somebody once carried weight like that for me," he said finally quietly, "and nobody ever noticed until it was too late to fix it." Before Clara could ask what that meant, what had happened, what ghost lived behind those words, Marcus appeared at the edge of the dining room, and something about the tightness in his expression made both of them go still. "Mr. Valenti, a word if you have a moment." Adrian excused himself, and Clara watched the 2 men step into the hallway near the kitchen. Watched Marcus lean in and speak low and urgent. Watched Adrian's entire posture change in real time, the relaxed warmth of moments earlier hardening into something sharp and alert. That was the first crack in the calm. The first sign that something was moving beneath the surface of Clara's new life, something she hadn't been told about yet. She didn't find out what it was that night. Adrian left abruptly, offering only a brief apology and a promise to explain later, and Clara went home, turning the strange tension over in her mind, unable to shake the feeling that whatever had pulled him away wasn't a minor inconvenience. It wasn't. 3 days later, Clara arrived at the restaurant to find the back office door slightly ajar, a door she was certain she'd locked the night before, a door only she and 2 senior managers had keys to. Her stomach dropped instantly. She stepped inside, carefully scanning the room. Nothing appeared to be missing. The safe was locked. The computer was password protected and showed no signs of tampering. But on her desk, sitting perfectly centered where she couldn't miss it, was a single folded piece of paper that hadn't been there the night before. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. There was no signature, no explanation, just a short typed line that made the blood drain from her face the moment she read it. "You should have stayed invisible. It was safer that way." Clara stood frozen, staring at the words, her heart hammering so loud she could hear it in her own ears. She read the sentence 3 times, as if reading it again might change what it said, might soften the threat curled inside those 8 words. Someone had been in her locked office. Someone had known exactly which desk to leave the note on. Someone had known somehow that this warning would matter to her specifically. She called Marcus before she called Adrian, her hands still shaking as she dialed. "Marcus, I need you to come to the restaurant right now. Someone's been in my office. Within 20 minutes, Marcus was standing in her office examining the door. The lock, the note, his expression carefully neutral in a way that told Clara he was working very hard not to alarm her further. "This lock wasn't forced," he said quietly. "Whoever did this either had a key or knew how to bypass the system without leaving damage. That's not random. That's someone with resources." "What does it mean, stayed invisible? Invisible from what?" Marcus hesitated, and that hesitation told Clara more than any answer could have. "I think," he said carefully, "that's a conversation you need to have with Mr. Valenti." Adrian arrived 40 minutes later, and the moment he read the note, Clara watched something in his face go completely dangerously still. Not panic, not surprise exactly, but a kind of cold recognition, like a man confirming a fear he'd been quietly carrying since the night Clara collapsed on his restaurant floor. "Adrian, talk to me." Clara's voice came out sharper than she intended, fear making her blunt. "Someone broke into my office. Someone left a threat with my name basically written all over it. I think I deserve to know what I've walked into." Adrian set the note down carefully, like it might detonate if handled roughly. "There are people," he said slowly, "who have wanted to hurt me for a long time. People who understand that I don't have many soft spots left. Family I can lose. People I genuinely care about protecting." He looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, Clara saw something that looked almost like fear behind his composed exterior. "You've become visible very quickly, Clara. Publicly connected to me. Publicly successful under my ownership. That visibility unfortunately comes with a cost I should have warned you about sooner." "Are you saying someone is targeting me because of you?" "I'm saying it's possible. And I should have told you that risk existed before I ever offered you this position." Adrian's jaw tightened, guilt, flashing raw and unguarded across his face for just a moment before the control slid back into place. "I was so focused on giving you away out of one kind of danger, I didn't think clearly enough about walking you into another." Clara sat down slowly, the fear in her chest tangling with something else. Anger maybe, or a stubborn refusal to be frightened into retreating from the first real opportunity she'd ever been given. "Who would do this? I have a list of possibilities, none of them confirmed yet." Adrian's voice hardened, all business now, all control. "Marcus, I want cameras installed in every office and hallway of this building by tonight. I want the locks changed, and I want a record of everyone who's had access to this floor in the last month." "On it," Marcus said, already moving toward the door. "And Clara?" Adrian turned back to her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "You're not going home alone tonight. Not until we understand what we're dealing with. I don't need a babysitter, Adrian. This isn't about whether you need one. It's about whether I can live with myself if something happens to you because I underestimated how dangerous my own life could become for the people standing next to me." His voice dropped lower, rougher, something raw bleeding through the careful composure. "I've already lost people I cared about to this world, Clara. I'm not doing it again, not without a fight." The words hung in the air between them heavier than either of them seemed prepared for, and Clara realized with a jolt that this wasn't simply an employer protecting an investment. Something else had crept quietly into the space between them over the last 6 weeks. Something neither of them had named out loud. Yet something that made the threat sitting on her desk feel not just dangerous, but personal, in a way that terrified her far more than any anonymous note ever could. "Okay," she said quietly, surprising herself with how easily the concession came. "I won't fight you on this one." That night, Adrian insisted on having Marcus drive Clara home, with a second car trailing discreetly behind for the first several blocks, before peeling off once they confirmed nobody was following. Clara sat in the back seat, staring out the window at a city that suddenly felt different than it had that morning. The same streets, the same buildings, but somehow sharper now threaded through with a danger she hadn't known to look for before. Her phone buzzed halfway home. A text from an unknown number. "Ask him what happened to the last woman who got too close." Clara's blood went cold. She stared at the message for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the screen, unsure whether to show Marcus immediately or sit with the question first, turning it over, terrified of what the answer might actually be. She showed him. Marcus's face, reflected in the rearview mirror, went carefully blank, in a way that told Clara this wasn't the first time he'd heard something like this. "Marcus!" Her voice shook slightly. "What woman? What happened?" "That's not my story to tell, Ms. Bennett." His eyes met hers briefly in the mirror, something like sympathy flickering there. "But I'd be lying if I told you it wasn't real. There's history there. Painful history. I think Mr. Valenti's been waiting for the right moment to explain it to you himself." "And when exactly is the right moment supposed to be?" "After I get another anonymous threat, after someone breaks into my office again. I'll tell him you asked," Marcus said quietly, and something in his tone told Clara that this conversation, whatever it was going to reveal, was coming, whether she was ready for it or not. She didn't sleep well that night, replaying the unknown number's message over and over, turning it into 100 different terrible shapes in her exhausted mind. Who was the last woman? What had happened to her? Was Clara walking directly into the same danger, blind and unprepared, the way that other woman apparently had? The next morning, Clara arrived at the restaurant to find the entire staff buzzing with tension, though nobody would tell her exactly why until she found Mia hovering near the kitchen entrance, eyes wide. "Someone was here last night," Mia whispered. After closing, one of the security guys said he saw someone circling the block twice, real slow, just watching the building. He tried to approach, and the car sped off before he got close enough to see a plate. Clara felt the fear from the night before curdle into something colder, more concrete. By noon, a second note appeared, this time slipped beneath the front door of the restaurant itself, found by a busser before opening. Marcus intercepted it before Clara could see it, but she caught enough of his expression when he read it to understand it was worse than the first. "What did it say, Clara?" "Marcus." "What did it say?" He hesitated a long moment before finally showing her, clearly deciding that keeping her in the dark was doing more harm than good. "Tell her to walk away now. She still has time." The last one didn't. Clara's hands went cold around the paper. "I need to talk to Adrian, right now. Not tonight, not tomorrow, now." She found him 20 minutes later in his office across town, and the second she walked in and set the note down on his desk. Without a word, she watched every trace of composure drain from his face. "Who is the last one, Adrian?" Silence stretched between them, long and heavy. "Sit down, Clara." "I don't want to sit down. I want an answer." Adrian ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely, visibly shaken, not by the threat itself, but by what he was about to have to say out loud. "Her name was Isabel," he said finally, quietly, like the name itself cost him something to speak. "She worked for me 8 years ago. Not in the restaurants, in a different part of my business, one I've spent the last several years trying to walk away from entirely. She got close to me the same way you have. People who wanted to hurt me found out. They used her to send a message." His voice cracked on the last word just slightly, just enough for Clara to hear exactly how deep this wound still ran. "I didn't get to her in time." Clara's stomach dropped straight through the floor. "Are you telling me she's dead because someone wanted to hurt you?" "Yes." The single word landed in the room like a physical blow. Clara sank into the chair after all her legs no longer entirely trustworthy. Her mind racing through every moment of the last 6 weeks, every kind word, every warm glance, every quiet confession Adrian had offered her, now recontextualized, against the weight of a dead woman's name she hadn't known existed until 60 seconds ago. "And you let me walk into this anyway," Clara said slowly, anger creeping into her voice, now sharp and justified. "You gave me this job, you got close to me knowing full well that the same thing could happen to me that happened to her. And you didn't say a single word." "I know." Adrian's voice was raw, stripped of every ounce of the cold authority she'd first met him with. "I told myself it would be different this time. That I've changed things, cut ties with the parts of my business that got Isabel killed, that I'm careful now in ways I wasn't back then. But the second that first note showed up on your desk, I knew I was lying to myself the same way I lied to her. I put you in danger the moment I noticed you on that restaurant floor, and I have spent every day since then telling myself it was worth the risk because of who you turned out to be." He looked up at her, and the naked fear in his eyes was unlike anything Clara had seen from him before. I don't know how to protect you and keep you close at the same time, Clara. And I'm terrified that whatever choice I make, I'm going to lose. Clara sat in silence for a long moment, fear and fury, and something far more complicated tangling together in her chest. You should have told me, she finally said. Not because I would have said no to the job. I don't know if I would have. But because I deserved to walk into this with my eyes open the same way you're asking me to trust you now. You're right. Adrian's voice was quiet, stripped bare. You're right, and I'm sorry, and I understand if that changes how you see me. Clara studied him for a long moment. The man who had knelt on a marble floor for a woman he didn't know, who had handed her an empire and asked for nothing in return, who was now sitting across from her, carrying the weight of a woman he'd failed to protect 8 years ago, terrified of failing again. It doesn't change how I see you, she said slowly, surprising herself with the honesty of it. But it does change what I need from you now. No more secrets, Adrian. If there's danger, I need to know about it before it's sitting on my desk in the form of a threat. Agreed. Something in his shoulders eased slightly, relief and gratitude flickering across his face. Whoever is doing this, I have people looking into it right now. I promise you, Clara, I will find them before they get anywhere near you. And if you can't find them in time... Adrian's jaw tightened, and when he answered, his voice had gone hard and certain in a way that sent a chill straight through her. Then I'll make sure they understand exactly what happens to people who threaten what's mine. The word landed strangely between them. Mine, and Clara felt her pulse stutter, unsure whether to be frightened by the possessiveness in it or comforted by the fierce protection underneath it. Before she could untangle the feeling, Marcus knocked sharply on the office door, his face pale, his phone already extended toward Adrian. You need to see this, now. Adrian took the phone, and Clara watched his expression shift from confusion to something far darker within seconds. What is it? Clara demanded. Adrian turned the phone toward her slowly, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. It was a photograph, grainy, clearly taken from a distance, but unmistakable. Clara standing outside her mother's apartment building 2 nights earlier, completely unaware she was being watched. Completely unaware that whoever was sending these threats already knew exactly where the people she loved most in this world went home to sleep every night. Beneath the photo, a single line of text glowed on the screen, cold and final. Tick-tock, Adrian. You know how this ends if you don't listen. Clara's hands began to shake, the full weight of what she'd walked into, finally completely crashing down around her. Not an abstract threat anymore. Not a note on a desk. She could rationalize away, but proof undeniable and terrifying that someone had been watching her mother's building. Someone knew exactly where to find the people Clara would do anything to protect. And whoever they were, they had made it absolutely clear that Clara Bennett's new life had already put every person she loved directly in the path of danger she never saw coming. Clara stared at the photograph until the image burned itself into the back of her eyelids, herself, unaware, standing outside the one place in the world she needed to feel safe. Her mother's building, the place where Eleanor slept every night with the windows cracked because the radiator ran too hot. The place where Tyler still kept a key from high school, the place that was supposed to be untouchable. They know where she lives. Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. Adrian, they know where my mother lives. I know. Adrian's voice had gone flat, controlled, in a way that was somehow more frightening than if he'd shouted. And that ends today. How does that end today? You can't just... Marcus? Adrian didn't look away from Clara as he spoke, but his command cut through the room like a blade. I want a security detail outside Eleanor Bennett's building within the hour. Unmarked car, someone who knows how to be invisible. And I want Tyler's campus checked too. If they've done surveillance on the mother, they may have done it on the brother. On it. Marcus was already moving, phone pressed to his ear before he cleared the doorway. Clara sat frozen, her mind racing through every terrible possibility. At once, her mother alone in that apartment, unaware, unprotected, her brother walking across a campus quad with a target on his back that he didn't even know existed. The life she thought she'd stepped into 6 weeks ago. The one with a good salary and dignity and a locked door with her name on it had somehow transformed into something out of a nightmare she couldn't wake herself from. "I need to call her," Clara said, already reaching for her phone. "I need to tell her to leave to go somewhere." "Clara." Adrian caught her wrist gently, not stopping her, just steadying her. "If you call your mother right now panicked, telling her someone might be watching her building, what do you think happens?" Clara's hand trembled. "She panics. Her heart. She has a heart condition. Adrian, the stress alone could—" "Exactly." His voice softened, though the urgency underneath it never wavered. "We protect her without terrifying her. I have people who can do that quietly. What she needs from you right now isn't panic. It's for you to trust that I am handling this. Trust you." Clara let out a short, disbelieving laugh, adrenaline and fear making her reckless with her words. "You knew this world could reach the people I love, and you didn't tell me until there was already a photograph of my mother's building sitting on your phone. You're right to be angry with me." Adrian didn't flinch from it. "Be angry. Just don't let it stop you from letting me fix what I can still fix." Clara pulled her hand back, pacing the length of the office, trying to force air into lungs that felt like they'd forgotten how to expand properly. 6 weeks. 6 weeks since she'd collapsed on a marble floor and woken up to a stranger's careful eyes, and now her entire world had narrowed down to a single terrifying question: how far would these people go, and who exactly were they? "Who is doing this?" she demanded. "You said you had a list of possibilities. I want names. I want to understand what I'm actually facing." Adrian hesitated, and that hesitation, the same one she'd learned to recognize as a man, deciding how much truth she could handle, made her stomach clench. "There's a man named Victor Kessler," Adrian said finally. "Years ago, before I restructured everything, before I tried to pull my businesses towards something legitimate, Victor and I operated in the same circles. We were partners briefly. Then we weren't." His jaw tightened. "He believes I owe him something. I don't believe I owe him. Territory, money, loyalty I never promised. When I started distancing myself from certain operations, cleaning things up, Victor saw it as weakness, an opportunity. And Isabel." The name landed heavy in the room, and Adrian's eyes closed briefly before he answered. "I've never had proof, but I've always believed Victor was behind what happened to her. He wanted to hurt me in the deepest way he could find, and he found her." Adrian's voice roughened. "I couldn't prove it then. I've spent 8 years trying to build a case quietly, carefully, without starting a war. I couldn't guarantee winning. And now he's circling again, because he's noticed exactly what I noticed the night you collapsed, that you matter to me, that you're a way to reach me that actually works." Clara absorbed this piece by piece, feeling the shape of the danger solidify into something almost tangible. "So what do we do? Wait for him to make his next move?" "No." Adrian's eyes hardened with a resolve that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. Not fear of him, but something closer to awe at the sheer force of will radiating off him. "We find him before he finds another opening, and we make it absolutely clear that touching you, touching your family, comes with consequences he is not prepared to survive." That sounds like exactly the kind of thing that gets someone killed, Adrian. "Then it's a good thing," Adrian said quietly, "that I have absolutely no intention of losing this time." The silence that followed was heavy with everything neither of them said out loud, the ghost of Isabel standing invisibly between them, a warning neither of them needed spoken aloud, twice. That evening, Adrian insisted Clara stay somewhere secure, rather than return to her own apartment, and for the first time since accepting the position, Clara didn't argue. She sat in the back of an unmarked car as it wound through unfamiliar streets, finally pulling up to a modest brownstone in a quiet neighborhood that looked nothing like what she expected from a man of Adrian's wealth. No gates, no obvious security, just a house that blended perfectly into its surroundings. "This is one of the properties nobody associates with me," Adrian explained as he led her inside. "No records connect it to my name directly. You'll be safe here while we sort this out." Clara stood in the doorway of a guest room that felt more like a real home than her own apartment ever had, and something about the domesticity of it, a made bed, a stocked bathroom, a small bookshelf with novels she actually recognized, cracked something open in her chest. "Adrian," her voice caught. "Is this what happened to Isabel, being hidden away, protected? And it still wasn't enough." Adrian stood very still in the hallway, and for a long moment Clara thought he wouldn't answer. "Isabel refused protection," he said finally. "She was proud, independent. She told me she didn't need to be hidden, that she could handle herself." His voice cracked just slightly, just enough. "I respected that about her too much to insist. That was my mistake. I let her convince me that pride was the same thing as safety. And you think I'm going to make the same mistake? I think," Adrian said slowly, meeting her eyes, "that I'm not going to give you the chance to. Not because I don't trust your strength, Clara. Because I've already lost someone to my own hesitation once, and I refuse to let that happen twice." Clara wanted to argue. Every instinct in her rebelled against being hidden away, against becoming someone who needed protecting, rather than someone who protected others. But she thought of the photograph of her mother's building of Tyler crossing campus, unaware, and she swallowed the protest before it fully formed. "One condition," she said instead. "I'm not disappearing from my job. I'm not letting Victor Kessler, or whoever he is, chase me out of the first thing in my life that's actually mine." Something like pride flickered across Adrian's face. "I wouldn't expect anything less from you." Over the following days, Clara split her time between the restaurant and the quiet brownstone, always accompanied, always watched by careful eyes she rarely saw, but somehow always sensed. The restaurant itself became her refuge in a strange way, the one place where the chaos of Victor Kessler's shadow felt distant, where the rhythm of service and staff, and the small daily victories of running something well, kept her mind anchored to something solid. Mia noticed the change in her first. "You seem different this week," Mia said quietly one evening, restocking napkins beside Clara near the host stand. "Not bad different, just careful. Like you're watching the doors more than you used to." Clara forced a smile, unwilling to burden the girl with the truth. "Just a lot on my mind. Don't worry about it." Mia studied her for a moment longer than Clara expected, and then said something that caught her completely off guard. "You know, before you became manager, I used to watch you. The way you'd notice things nobody else noticed. Like you had this sense for when something was about to go wrong before it actually did." Mia hesitated. "You've got that same look right now?" Clara's chest tightened, unnerved by how transparent she apparently wasn't, as good at hiding things as she'd hoped. "I'm fine, Mia." "Okay." Mia didn't push, but her eyes lingered with quiet concern before she moved back to the dining room, and Clara made a silent note that she needed to be more careful about what she let show on her face for everyone's sake. The break in the investigation came 4 days later, and it came from an unexpected place. Marcus arrived at the restaurant just before closing, his expression a carefully controlled mixture of triumph and grim satisfaction that told Clara something significant had happened. "We found the source of the office break-in," Marcus said without preamble, pulling Clara and Adrian, who had arrived 20 minutes earlier for his usual corner table, into the back office. "Who?" Adrian's voice was tight with anticipation. "Deborah Wexler." Clara's stomach dropped. "Deborah?" "She left months ago. She took the severance. She's not even in the city anymore, as far as I know." "She's not the one who broke in," Marcus clarified. "But she's the one who gave someone the access codes to do it. Financial records show a payment to her account 3 days before the first note appeared. $15,000 wired from an account we've traced back through 2 shell companies to Victor Kessler." Adrian finished, his voice going cold and hard. "Victor Kessler," Marcus confirmed. "Deborah was angry when she left, angrier than she let on. Kessler's people found her, offered her money to hand over security codes and building access details, and she took it without asking too many questions about why a stranger wanted that kind of access to a restaurant she no longer worked at." Clara felt fury rise up through the fear, sharp and clarifying. "She sold us out because she was bitter about losing a job she was bad at in the first place." "It appears that way." Marcus's jaw tightened. "We've confirmed her involvement, but she's disappeared, left her apartment, cleared her accounts of the payment. Kessler's people likely relocated her the moment we started looking to protect their access to the information she still might have. So she's compromised further, Adrian said, already thinking several steps ahead. Which means Kessler doesn't just have building access. He may have staff records, personal information on every employee who's worked here in the last year, including Clara's. The full weight of that landed on Clara like a physical blow. Every address, every phone number, every emergency contact she'd listed when she started working at the Aurelia, all of it potentially in the hands of a man who had already proven through Isabel exactly how far he was willing to go. "He has my mother's information," Clara said slowly, horror creeping through her voice. "From my emergency contact forms." That's how he knew where she lived. "Yes," Adrian said grimly, "which means we move faster than we planned." That night marked the first true retention hook of the unfolding crisis. The moment the danger stopped being abstract and became something with a face, a name, a documented trail of betrayal that had come from inside Clara's own trusted circle. If Deborah could be bought for $15,000 after months of resentment, who else might Kessler already be watching, already testing, already preparing to turn? Clara barely slept that night in the quiet brownstone, replaying every interaction she'd had with staff over the past 6 weeks, searching for signs of betrayal she might have missed, wondering how many more cracks existed in the foundation she'd thought she was building so carefully. The next development came from a direction nobody expected. 2 days later, Eleanor Bennett called Clara in a state of confusion that immediately set every alarm bell in Clara's chest ringing. "Clara, honey, there was a man here today. Said he was doing a survey for the building about renovation plans. Very polite. But he asked the strangest questions." Clara's blood went cold. "What kind of questions, Mom?" "He asked how long I had lived here, whether I lived alone, whether my daughter visited often." Eleanor's voice wavered, slightly uncertainty creeping through her usual steadiness. "I didn't think much of it until he asked what time you usually come by." That felt strange, didn't it? Why would a building surveyor need to know that? Clara's hand tightened around the phone hard enough to hurt. "Mom, I need you to do something for me, and I need you not to panic." "Clara, you're scaring me. I need you to pack a bag, just for a few days. I have a friend with a place outside the city, very nice, very safe, and I think it would be good for you to get some fresh air for a little while." "Clara Bennett, what is going on? You tell me the truth right now." Clara closed her eyes, torn between her promise to Adrian about not panicking her mother and her absolute inability to lie to the woman who had raised her alone through more hardship than most people faced in a lifetime. "There are some people connected to my new job who aren't good people," Clara said carefully, choosing each word like she was diffusing something live. "I don't think you're in danger, but I want to be careful, and that means getting you somewhere safe for a little while until this is resolved. Please, Mom, trust me on this one." The line went quiet for a long moment, and when Eleanor spoke again, her voice had steadied into something firm, something that reminded Clara exactly where her own resilience had come from in the first place. "Okay, I trust you. Send your friend, whoever they are. I'll be ready in 20 minutes. Clara hung up and immediately called Marcus, relaying every detail of the surveyor's visit, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone twice. Within the hour, Eleanor Bennett was in a car headed to a secure property 2 hours outside the city, and within 2 hours, Marcus had confirmed through security footage obtained from a neighboring building that the surveyor matched the physical description of a man previously linked to Victor Kessler's operation. The threat wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was standing on Eleanor Bennett's doorstep asking careful, targeted questions, and that was the moment Clara understood completely. And finally, that this had stopped being about her own safety entirely. This was about everyone she loved, and Victor Kessler had just demonstrated without a single overt threat that he could reach any of them whenever he chose. Adrian found Clara sitting alone in the brownstone kitchen that evening, staring at nothing, her tea gone cold in front of her. "Your mother's secure," he said quietly, sitting across from her. "The property is one of the most protected I have. Nobody finds her there." He was at her door, Adrian, standing right outside her apartment asking when I usually visit. Clara's voice shook with a fury that had fear coiled tightly beneath it. This isn't a game to send a message anymore. This is a man deciding exactly how to hurt me in the most effective way possible, and he's choosing my 71-year-old mother to do it. I know. Adrian's hands curled into fists on the table, restrained violence radiating off him in a way Clara had never witnessed before. And I promise you, Clara, this ends. Soon. How? Clara's voice cracked. How does it end? Adrian, do you go to war with this man? Does that bring Isabel back? Does that guarantee my mother stays safe? Or does it just paint an even bigger target on everyone I love? Adrian was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice had lost all of its usual controlled authority, replaced by something raw and exhausted and painfully honest. I don't have a perfect answer for you. I wish I did. He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. What I know is that men like Victor don't stop because you ask nicely. They don't stop because you hide. They stop when the cost of continuing becomes higher than whatever they think they're gaining. That's the only language he's ever understood. And what does that cost look like? It looks like me finally finishing what I should have finished 8 years ago. Adrian's jaw tightened. It looks like proving beyond any doubt exactly what he did to Isabel, and making sure he faces consequences severe enough that touching anyone connected to me becomes unthinkable permanently. Clara studied him for a long moment, seeing beneath the composed exterior to the exhausted, guilt-ridden man underneath someone who had spent 8 years quietly grieving a woman he couldn't save, terrified of failing the same way twice. I want to help, she said finally. Adrian's head snapped up. Absolutely not. Adrian. No, Clara. I am not putting you directly into the middle of a confrontation with Victor Kessler. That is not a conversation we're having. You already put me in the middle of it, Clara shot back, her voice rising with frustration and fear tangled together. The moment you knelt down on that restaurant floor, the moment you bought that restaurant overnight, the moment my name became connected to yours in front of 60 of the wealthiest people in Chicago, I was already in the middle of it. Pretending otherwise doesn't make me safer. It just means I'm walking into danger blind, instead of walking into it with my eyes open. Adrian stared at her, something shifting behind his eyes, frustration warring with a grudging, growing respect for the fact that she refused, absolutely refused to be handled like something fragile. What exactly are you proposing? I don't know yet. Clara's voice steadied resolve, hardening into something that surprised even her. But I'm not running, Adrian. I'm not hiding in this house indefinitely while you fight a war on my behalf without me. You gave me the chance to stop running from my life 6 weeks ago. I'm not starting again now just because things got dangerous. The words landed heavy in the room, and Adrian studied her for a long, silent moment, before something in his expression softened into what looked almost like awe. Isabel never talked to me like that, he said quietly. She let me protect her because she thought that's what I needed. She never once told me what she actually needed in return. Maybe that's the difference, Clara said softly. I'm not trying to make this easier for you, Adrian. I'm trying to survive it on my own terms with you beside me instead of in front of me. Something passed between them in that moment. Not quite a decision, not quite a promise, but the recognition of two people choosing to face something together rather than one person shielding the other from it entirely. Adrian reached across the table, and Clara let him take her hand, and for the first time since the first note appeared on her desk, she felt something steadier than fear settle into her chest. The plan that formed over the following days was careful, methodical, and dangerous in ways that made Clara's pulse spike every time she thought too long about the details. Marcus had identified a property Victor Kessler used for meetings, a warehouse on the industrial edge of the city, chosen specifically because it sat outside any jurisdiction that moved quickly or asked careful questions. Adrian's plan wasn't confrontation. It was exposure, gathering enough concrete evidence of Kessler's involvement in both Isabel's death and the current threats against Clara's family to hand over to contacts within law enforcement, Adrian had spent years quietly cultivating people who owed him favors, substantial enough to guarantee the investigation wouldn't simply disappear. "I need someone inside who won't raise suspicion," Adrian explained one evening, spreading documents across the brownstone's kitchen table. "Kessler knows my face. He knows Marcus's face, but he's never seen Clara in person." Clara's stomach dropped. "You want me to go in there?" "No." Adrian's voice was firm. "Absolutely not directly. But there's a shipment tracking system Kessler uses that runs through a logistics company with a front office downtown. If we can get someone inside that office even briefly, we can access records that would directly tie him to the payment made to Deborah and potentially to the surveillance on your mother. And you need someone who looks like they belong there. Someone who isn't already flagged." "Exactly." Clara felt the fear tighten in her chest, but underneath it, something else stirred too. A fierce protective determination that had nothing to do with recklessness and everything to do with refusing to remain a passive target in her own story. "Tell me exactly what I need to do." The operation, when it finally happened 3 days later, unfolded with a tension that made every second stretch impossibly long. Clara walked into the logistics office wearing a borrowed blazer and carrying a clipboard playing the role of a compliance auditor. Marcus had built a paper trail for her over the previous 48 hours, her heart hammering so hard she was certain the receptionist could hear it. "I'm here for the quarterly file review," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Corporate sent over the request yesterday. I believe someone should have confirmed the appointment." The receptionist, a bored-looking young man barely paying attention, glanced at a screen, found nothing contradicting her story, because Marcus had ensured there was a digital trail supporting it, and waved her toward a back office, without a second glance. Clara's hands shook as she sat down at the unattended computer terminal, exactly where Marcus's intelligence had promised it would be, and inserted the small drive he'd given her. The software ran silently in the background, copying files at a pace that felt agonizingly slow, while Clara kept her eyes on the door, every creak of the building sending fresh adrenaline through her veins. 90 seconds in footsteps approached the office door. Clara's entire body went rigid. She pulled the clipboard toward her, forcing her expression into calm professionalism as a man in a security uniform pushed the door open. "Can I help you with something?" "Compliance audit?" Clara said, holding up the clipboard, praying her voice didn't betray the panic clawing up her throat. "Quarterly review. Should be in the system." The guard studied her for a long, agonizing moment, and Clara felt certain he could hear her heart slamming against her ribs. "Nobody told me about an audit today." "That would be a conversation for corporate, not me." Clara forced an exasperated smile, channeling every ounce of managerial authority she'd built over the last 6 weeks. "I just go where I'm told to go. If there's a problem, I can leave and reschedule, but that paperwork delay usually falls on whoever's listed as the site supervisor." The mention of paperwork delay and supervisory blame did exactly what Marcus had predicted it would. The guard's irritation shifted from suspicion of her to irritation at the bureaucracy itself. "Fine. Just don't touch anything you're not supposed to." "Wouldn't dream of it." The guard left and Clara exhaled a shaking breath, glancing back at the screen where the transfer bar had finally mercifully reached completion. She pulled the drive free, tucked it into her blazer pocket, and walked out of that building at a measured pace that cost her every ounce of self-control she possessed, resisting the overwhelming urge to run the moment she cleared the front doors. She made it 3 blocks before Marcus's car pulled up beside her, and the second she climbed inside, her hands finally began shaking uncontrollably, the adrenaline crash hitting her all at once. "You did it," Marcus said, disbelief and admiration mixed in his voice as he pulled away from the curb. "Clara, you actually did it." Adrian was waiting at the brownstone when they arrived, and the moment Clara stepped through the door, he crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms without a single word of hesitation. "Don't ever do anything like that again," he murmured into her hair, his voice rough with a fear he'd clearly been holding back the entire time she'd been gone. "I don't think my heart can survive it. I got what we needed." Clara said, her voice muffled against his chest, still trembling slightly. "It's done, Adrian." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes searching her face like he was confirming piece by piece that she was actually safe, actually standing in front of him, unharmed. "You are the single, most reckless, most extraordinary woman I have ever met," he said quietly, and something in the way he said it made Clara's breath catch entirely. Is that a compliment or a complaint? Both, constantly. A faint, exhausted smile broke across his face. "Marcus, get that drive to our contact tonight. I want this moving before Kessler realizes anything's missing." The files, once decoded and cross-referenced by Adrian's contacts, revealed exactly what they needed: a clear paper trail connecting Victor Kessler's shell companies to the payment made to Deborah Wexler, to the surveillance conducted on Eleanor Bennett's building, and buried deeper in records that predated everything else, financial transactions from 8 years earlier that lined up with uncomfortable precision against the timeline of Isabel's death. It wasn't a full confession, but it was enough to hand to the right investigators, enough to finally build the case Adrian had spent 8 years unable to complete on his own. For one brief, fragile moment, sitting together in the quiet brownstone as the evidence moved into motion, Clara allowed herself to believe the worst of it might actually be over. She was wrong. The call came just after midnight. Marcus's voice tight with an urgency that yanked Clara out of the first deep sleep she'd had in a week. "Adrian. Clara. You need to see this right now." Adrian put the call on speaker, his face draining of color as Marcus's voice continued. "Kessler knows the files are gone. He's not waiting for law enforcement to move on him. He's already responding." "Responding how?" Adrian's voice had gone dangerously quiet. There was a pause on the line, heavy and terrible, before Marcus finally answered. "He has your mother, Clara." The words hit Clara like a physical blow, the room tilting violently around her, exactly the way it had the night she'd collapsed on the Aurelia's dining room floor months ago. Except this time, there was no gentle stranger kneeling beside her to catch the fall. Only the horrifying absolute certainty that the secure property Adrian had promised was untouchable, had somehow impossibly failed to keep her mother safe after all. Clara didn't remember standing up. One second she was sitting on the edge of the bed, and the next she was on her feet. Phone gripped so hard in her hand that her knuckles had gone white, Marcus's voice still echoing through the speaker. "That's not possible." She heard herself say the words, coming out strange and distant, like someone else was speaking them. "You said that property was untouchable. You said nobody finds her there." "I know what I said." Marcus's voice was tight, controlled, in the specific way of a man forcing himself not to panic because panic wouldn't help anyone right now. "The security team lost contact 40 minutes ago. When backup arrived, the 2 guards on rotation were unconscious. Not dead. Unconscious. Your mother wasn't there." "Unconscious," Clara repeated, and something about the clinical precision of the word made her stomach heave. Adrian was already moving, pulling a jacket on his face carved from stone, in a way Clara had never seen before. Not the cold authority she'd witnessed that first night at the restaurant, but something colder. Something that looked almost like a man returning to a version of himself he'd tried very hard to leave behind. "Get me everything," Adrian said into the phone, his voice dropping into a register that made the hair on Clara's arms stand up. "Every camera within 6 blocks of that property. Every plate that passed through in the last hour. I want Kessler's known properties pulled up on a map in the next 10 minutes. "Already on it." Adrian ended the call and turned to Clara, and for just a moment before the mask of control slid fully back into place, she saw something raw and terrified flash across his face. The same look she realized with a sick lurch that he must have worn 8 years ago, standing somewhere she'd never see receiving news about Isabel, that had arrived exactly 1 moment too late. "Adrian." Her voice cracked completely now, the adrenaline finally breaking through the numbness. "If anything happens to her..." "Nothing is happening to her." His hands closed around her shoulders, steady, despite the storm clearly raging behind his eyes. "Listen to me, Clara. Kessler doesn't want your mother dead. Dead doesn't get him what he wants. He wants leverage. That means she's valuable to him exactly as long as she's alive and unharmed. That buys us time." How much time? Adrian didn't answer that, and the silence told Clara everything his words hadn't. Within 15 minutes, they were in a car speeding through empty streets toward Adrian's downtown office, Marcus already waiting with 3 laptops open across the conference table when they arrived. Security footage scrolling across each screen in grainy silent replay. Here. Marcus froze, one frame zoomed in. Camera 2 blocks from the safe house. Black SUV, no plates visible, but the timing lines up exactly with when contact was lost. Track it, Adrian said. Already did? It goes dark 11 minutes later, turning into a parking structure with no interior cameras. But Marcus pulled up a second window, a different angle. A traffic camera 3 blocks further caught it again 40 minutes after that, heading north, toward Kessler's warehouse district. Adrian said, his voice going flat and dangerous. Clara stared at the screen, at the small blurred shape of a vehicle that might impossibly contain her mother somewhere inside it, and felt something inside her chest crack open. Not just fear now, but a fury so complete it steadied her hands instead of shaking them. "Then that's where we go," she said. "Clara, don't." She turned on Adrian with an intensity that made even Marcus go still. "Don't you dare tell me to stay behind and wait somewhere safe while my mother is sitting in a warehouse with a man who already proved what he's capable of. I already got inside Kessler's logistics office once. I can help." "This isn't a logistics office," Adrian said, his voice tight with restrained fear that Clara understood now wasn't just about her, but about every terrible echo this moment carried of a night 8 years ago he'd never fully recovered from. "This is Kessler himself, cornered, desperate, with nothing left to lose. That is an entirely different kind of danger. I don't care." Clara's voice didn't waver. "She is my mother, Adrian. I am not sitting in an office somewhere drinking coffee while you go get her. I am coming, and you can either work with me on how to do that safely, or I will find my own way there, and we both know that option is worse for everyone." Adrian stared at her for a long, taut moment, something warring visibly behind his eyes. The protective instinct that had cost him a woman he loved, once already fighting against the growing understanding that Clara Bennett was not, had never been someone who could be managed or contained against her will. "Fine," he said finally. The word dragged out of him, like it cost him physically to say it. "But you do exactly what I tell you when I tell you. No improvising, no logistics office stunts. If I say run, you run. Do you understand me?" "I understand." Marcus had already pulled up blueprints of the warehouse by the time they finished the exchange, an old shipping facility near the rail yards. 3 exits, mapped security cameras identified and partially disabled through a back door Marcus had apparently built into the building system months earlier during an entirely different piece of due diligence. "I have 4 men who can move with us within the hour," Marcus said. "Discreet, not police, not yet. Kessler will kill her the second he sees flashing lights, and we both know it." "No police," Adrian confirmed. "Not until she's out." Clara's stomach clenched at the casual certainty in his voice, the terrible practical calculation of a man who had clearly run scenarios like this before, who understood exactly how thin the margin was between success and catastrophe. "What does he actually want?" Clara asked. "If it's not the files anymore, if he already knows we have them, what is he trying to accomplish by taking my mother?" Adrian was quiet for a moment, his jaw working like the answer cost him something to say out loud. "He wants to trade her for the drive, and probably for something else." "What else?" "Me." Adrian met her eyes steadily. "He's spent 8 years wanting to hurt me the way he thinks I hurt him when I walked away from our partnership. Taking your mother isn't really about the files anymore, Clara. It's about forcing me into a room with him unprotected, where he finally gets to settle a score that's been eating at him for nearly a decade." "Then don't go." "I have to go." His voice was quiet, absolute. "Because the alternative is your mother staying exactly where she is." Clara felt the fear coil tighter in her chest, understanding now the full terrible shape of the trap Kessler had built, not just a kidnapping, but a lure constructed with precise, cruel intelligence designed to draw Adrian into exactly the kind of confrontation he'd spent 8 years trying to avoid. "Then we don't walk into it the way he's expecting," Clara said slowly. An idea forming even as fear screamed at her to simply beg him not to go at all. If he wants a trade, we give him a trade, but we control the terms. Marcus and Adrian both turned to look at her. I'm listening, Adrian said. Over the next 40 minutes, the plan took shape with a speed that left Clara's head spinning. Marcus's men would position themselves around the warehouse's perimeter before the official meeting time, using blueprints and camera blind spots to get close without triggering Kessler's own security. Adrian would go in exactly as demanded, alone, unarmed, visibly compliant. But the drive he carried wouldn't be the original. Marcus had already prepared a corrupted duplicate, identical in appearance, that would buy critical minutes once Kessler realized the data was worthless. And Clara would be the one true wildcard. Kessler couldn't have accounted for positioned outside, with Marcus's team watching for the signal that would tell her exactly when it was safe to move. I don't like this, Adrian said quietly, watching the final details fall into place. Any version of this plan where you're anywhere near that building terrifies me. I know. Clara reached for his hand, surprising herself with how naturally the gesture came. Now how far they'd traveled from the careful distance of that first office meeting weeks ago. But you taught me something, Adrian. You told me nobody saves you from a life you can save yourself from if someone just gives you the tools. I think that applies to more than just a restaurant. Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Fear still, but layered now with something that looked almost like pride. Almost like the beginning of hope in the middle of the worst night of both their lives. If anything happens to you, it won't. Clara squeezed his hand. We're getting her back, Adrian. Both of us. Tonight. The drive to the warehouse district happened mostly in silence, the city thinning out around them into wider, emptier streets, lined with dark industrial buildings that seemed to swallow sound itself. Clara sat in the back of Marcus's car, watching Adrian in the vehicle ahead through the windshield, memorizing the set of his shoulders, praying it wasn't the last time she'd see him upright and whole. Marcus parked 2 blocks out, killing the headlights, and the team moved with a discipline that told Clara this wasn't Marcus's first time coordinating something like this, however much she wished it were. Stay low, stay quiet, and stay exactly where I tell you, Marcus murmured, handing her a small earpiece. You'll hear everything that happens inside once Adrian's mic connects. If I tell you to move, you move fast. If I tell you to run, you don't ask why. Understood. They approached the warehouse through a gap in a chain-link fence, moving between shadows cast by rusted shipping containers, and Clara's heart hammered so violently, she was certain it could be heard from 50 feet away. Somewhere inside that building, her mother was sitting in the dark, frightened, not understanding why the quiet safety Clara had promised her had shattered so completely. Through the earpiece, Clara heard the moment Adrian stepped inside a heavy door, groaning open footsteps echoing against concrete, and then a voice she'd never heard before, smooth and cold, and satisfied in a way that made her skin crawl. Adrian Valenti, 8 years, and you still walk like you own every room you enter. Where is she, Victor? Straight to business. No small talk for old friends. Victor's voice carried an amusement that sounded rehearsed, performed for an audience of one. We were never friends, Adrian said flatly. Where is Eleanor Bennett? Safe, for now. Whether that continues depends entirely on what you brought me. Clara's fingers dug into Marcus's arm, and he gave her a small, steadying shake of his head. Not yet. I brought what you asked for, Adrian said. The drive. Now let her go. It's not quite that simple. Victor's voice sharpened. You see, I've had 8 years to think about what you took from me. My territory. My leverage. My reputation when word got around that you'd walked away and I couldn't stop you. 8 years of watching you build something clean while I was left holding the pieces of what we used to have. You built your own downfall, Victor. Don't put that on me. Careful. Something shifted in Victor's tone, colder now. I have a 71-year-old woman sitting 6 feet away from me with a heart condition, and you want to lecture me about accountability. Clara's stomach lurched violently, and it took every ounce of control she possessed to stay silent, to stay still, to trust the plan they'd built instead of screaming her mother's name into the dark. "The drive is real," Adrian said, his voice steady, despite everything Clara knew must be raging beneath the surface. "Everything you need is on it. Let Eleanor go, and I walk out of here too, and this ends tonight permanently." There was a long pause, the sound of footsteps, the distinct click of something being examined. "You always did think you were smarter than everyone in the room," Victor said finally, and something in his voice had gone dangerously quiet. "Which is exactly why I had someone check this drive the second your man dropped it off yesterday. Corrupted files, Adrian, every single one." Clara's blood ran cold. "That's not possible," Adrian said, and for the first time, Clara heard the barest crack in his composure. "Oh, it's very possible. You didn't think I'd verify what I was being handed. I've been doing this a long time, old friend. Longer than you in some ways." Victor's voice hardened completely now, all pretense of civility gone. "So here's where we actually stand. You brought me garbage, which means our trade is void, which means I have absolutely no reason left to keep this woman breathing except my own patience, and that patience is running very, very thin. Victor, bring me the real files, within the hour, or I start with her fingers and we see how long it takes before you actually believe I'm serious." Clara made a sound she couldn't stop, something between a sob and a gasp, and Marcus clamped a hand over her mouth instantly, eyes wide with urgent warning. Through the earpiece, she heard her mother's voice for the first time, faint, frightened, but unmistakably Eleanor's, refusing even now to sound as terrified as she must have felt. "Don't you dare give him anything, Adrian. Don't you dare let this man use me to—" A sharp sound cut her off, and Clara's entire body went rigid with horror. "Enough!" Victor snapped. "The old woman has spirit. I can respect that right up until it becomes inconvenient. Don't touch her again," Adrian said, and the fury in his voice was absolute, now barely controlled, a live wire sparking in the dark. "You want the real drive? Fine. It's on me. But you let her walk out that door first unharmed, and you get what you want the second she's clear. You're not exactly in a position to set terms. I'm the only one in this room who actually has what you need," Adrian said. "Which means I set exactly as many terms as I choose to." Silence stretched tense and terrible, and Clara held her breath so hard her lungs began to burn. "Fine," Victor said finally. "She walks. But you stay until I've verified everything myself. And if there's a single corrupted file on that drive, Adrian, I promise you, what happens next will make you wish I'd just started with her fingers instead." Marcus's hand found Clara's shoulder, squeezing once the signal finally that it was time to move. They circled the warehouse's east side, staying low behind stacked pallets and rusted machinery, until they reached a service door Marcus's team had already quietly disabled. 2 of his men were positioned there, weapons lowered, but ready, watching a narrow hallway that led toward the sound of voices. Through the earpiece, Clara heard a door creak, footsteps, and then Victor's voice again, closer now to wherever a second smaller room must have been. "Walk her out," Victor commanded someone. "And if she tries anything clever, you know what to do." A moment later, through the narrow gap of a propped door, Clara caught her first glimpse of her mother. In 6 days, pale, disheveled hands bound in front of her, but walking upright, chin raised, refusing to let the men flanking her see her break. Clara nearly moved right then, every instinct screaming at her to run forward, but Marcus's grip on her arm held firm, steady, insistent. "Not yet," he whispered. "Let her clear the building first." The wait felt like it lasted a lifetime, though it couldn't have been more than 90 seconds. Eleanor being walked down a corridor, out a side entrance toward the fence line, where Marcus's second team member waited in shadow, ready to intercept the moment she was clear of Kessler's men. The instant Eleanor stepped through the gap in the chain-link fence, Clara couldn't hold back any longer. She broke from Marcus's grip and ran, closing the distance in seconds, wrapping her arms around her mother so tightly that Eleanor gasped. "Clara!" Eleanor's voice cracked, tears finally spilling over, now that the performance of composure was no longer necessary. "Clara, my girl, I knew you'd come, I knew it. I'm here, Mom. I'm here. You're safe now, I've got you. Adrian, Eleanor whispered, urgently, pulling back just enough to grip Clara's arms. He's still in there. That man Victor, he's dangerous. Clara, truly dangerous. You have to help him. Clara's relief shattered instantly back into terror. Through the earpiece, still connected, she heard Victor's voice again, sharper now, angrier. This drive is clean, Victor said slowly, which means you actually kept your word. A pause, calculating. Which raises an interesting question, doesn't it? If you were willing to hand over everything to save an old woman you've known for 6 weeks? I wonder what else you'd be willing to give up to protect her daughter. Don't, Adrian said, his voice dropping into something low and dangerous. Don't you dare bring Clara into this. Oh, I think she's already very much in this. Victor's voice carried a cruel satisfaction now. In fact, I believe she's standing somewhere just outside this building right now. I noticed movement near the east fence about 10 minutes ago. Very sloppy for a man of your resources, Adrian. Clara's blood turned to ice. He knows, Marcus muttered, already moving. He knows we're out here. We need to move now. Through the earpiece, chaos erupted, shouted commands, the scrape of chairs. Adrian's voice rising above it all. Clara, if you can hear this, run. Get your mother somewhere safe and run. Do you understand me? Do not come back here. The transmission cut abruptly, replaced by static, and Clara's heart stopped entirely. Adrian. She surged forward, and this time it was Marcus who barely caught her, his own composure fraying at the edges. Clara, listen to me. Getting yourself caught doesn't help him. We stick to the plan. Marcus's voice was tight, but controlled, years of training, fighting to override raw panic. My men are already moving in. We extract Adrian the same way we extracted your mother, but you need to get her out of the danger zone right now. I am not leaving without him. Clara, I am not leaving Marcus. Her voice broke, fury and terror colliding. Get my mother to the car. I'm staying until I know he's safe. Marcus stared at her for one long, agonized second, clearly torn between protocol and the absolute certainty that Clara Bennett was not going to be moved from this spot by anything short of physical force. Fine, stay behind the container line. Do not move from that spot no matter what you hear. I mean it. He signaled to his second man, who guided Eleanor swiftly toward the waiting car. Eleanor casting one desperate, tearful glance back at her daughter, before disappearing into the darkness. Clara pressed herself against the cold metal of a shipping container, straining to hear anything through the earpiece that had gone silent, her entire body vibrating with a fear so absolute, it had gone almost calm, almost still. The way the eye of a storm goes quiet, right before everything breaks loose again. Then faintly she heard it, the sound of a struggle, muffled voices, and then unmistakably Adrian's voice, strained but alive. You're going to regret this, Victor. I've regretted plenty of things. Victor's voice answered, cold and final. One more won't change much. A gunshot cracked through the night. Clara's scream tore out of her before she could stop it, and she was moving before conscious thought caught up with her body, sprinting toward the warehouse entrance with no plan, no weapon, nothing but raw, desperate terror driving her forward. She burst through the side door Marcus's men had disabled, just as more shouting erupted from deeper inside the building, the sharp percussion of a second shot, then a third, echoing off concrete and steel in a way that made it impossible to tell where anyone actually was. Adrian! Her voice tore raw through her throat. A hand grabbed her arm, hard, yanking her sideways behind a stack of crates, just as a fourth shot splintered wood inches from where she'd been standing. Marcus's face was inches from hers, furious and terrified in equal measure. I told you to stay put. I heard a gunshot, Marcus. I couldn't just... You could have gotten yourself killed. Stay behind me, now. They moved together through the dim maze of the warehouse, Marcus leading with a precision Clara didn't have the capacity to question, until they rounded a final corner and Clara's entire world narrowed down to a single, horrifying image. Adrian was on the ground, one hand pressed hard against his shoulder, blood seeping dark between his fingers, but alive undeniably, miraculously, alive. Two of Marcus's men had Victor Kessler pinned against a support beam a few feet away, his face contorted with fury and disbelief at having been outmaneuvered in his own building. Adrian. Clara dropped to her knees beside him, hands hovering uselessly over the wound, panic and relief crashing through her simultaneously. "I'm fine," he managed, though his face had gone pale, sweat beading along his hairline. "Shoulder. Missed anything important?" "You were shot, Adrian, that is not fine." Clara. His hand, the uninjured one, found hers, gripping tight despite the obvious pain radiating through him. "You're supposed to be safe. Why aren't you safe?" "Because you asked me to run, and I've never once been good at doing what I'm told," Clara said, half laughing, half sobbing, pressing her hand hard against the wound to slow the bleeding, the way some distant calm part of her mind remembered from a first aid course years ago. Marcus was already on the phone calling for medical support, his voice tight with urgency, but no longer with the raw fear that had colored it minutes earlier. Across the room, Victor Kessler had gone quiet, watching the scene unfold with an expression that had shifted from fury into something closer to defeat. Understanding finally settling over him that whatever he'd hoped this night would accomplish, he had lost. "You should have just let me die 8 years ago." Victor spat toward Adrian, though the venom in his voice had thinned considerably. "Would have saved us both a lot of trouble." "I never wanted you dead, Victor." Adrian's voice was strained but steady. Even now, even bleeding on the concrete floor of a warehouse he'd walked into to save the people he loved. "I wanted you to stop. That's all I ever wanted. You made this into something so much bigger than it needed to be. Isabel wasn't supposed to die," Victor said suddenly quietly, and the words landed in the room like a confession finally, after 8 years breaking free. "That was never the plan. It was supposed to be a warning. It went wrong." Clara felt Adrian's hand tighten painfully around hers, felt his whole body go rigid at the admission, 8 years of grief and guilt and unanswered questions finally horribly given shape. "Say that again." Adrian said, his voice deadly quiet. "When the police are listening. Because right now, that's a confession, Victor, and there is nothing left in this world that's going to save you from what comes next." Sirens sounded in the distance, minutes later. Not the flashing chaos they'd worked so hard to avoid earlier, but a controlled arrival. Marcus had coordinated the moment Eleanor was safely clear. Law enforcement contacts Adrian had spent years cultivating, finally stepping forward with a case that could no longer be ignored or buried. Paramedics reached Adrian within minutes, working quickly to stabilize the wound, while Clara hovered close, refusing to let go of his hand, even as they lifted him onto a stretcher. "I'm not losing you," she said fiercely, walking alongside as they moved him toward the ambulance. "Not tonight, not ever. Do you understand me? Bossy," Adrian murmured, a weak, exhausted smile flickering across his pale face despite everything. "I like it." "Adrian, I'm not going anywhere, Clara." His hand squeezed hers one more time before the paramedics gently but firmly separated them for the ride. "I promise you, I'm not going anywhere." The hospital waiting room that night blurred into something Clara would never fully remember clearly. The fluorescent lights, the vending machine. Coffee neither she nor Eleanor actually drank. Marcus pacing the hallway, making calls that were slowly, methodically ensuring Victor Kessler would never again have the freedom to threaten anyone Adrian cared about. Eleanor sat beside her daughter, exhausted but resolute. Her bound wrists, now free, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders that a kind nurse had provided, despite Eleanor insisting repeatedly that she was fine, that Clara was the one who needed comforting tonight, not her. "He came for me," Eleanor said quietly, somewhere around 3 in the morning, watching Clara stare at the closed door of Adrian's recovery room. "A man like that, with everything he has to lose, walked into a warehouse for a woman he'd known 6 weeks because she happened to be my daughter." "I know. That's not nothing, Clara." Eleanor took her daughter's hand, the same steady grip she'd used to comfort Clara through every hardship of the last 3 years. "I've watched you carry the weight of this family alone for far too long. I've watched you give everything you have to everyone except yourself." Her eyes softened. "That man in there, whatever mess surrounds him, Whatever danger came with him, he sees you the way you deserve to be seen. Don't let fear make you forget that once the danger's passed. Clara didn't answer, but she leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. Exhaustion and relief, and something achingly tender, all tangled together in her chest. The surgeon emerged just after 5 in the morning, weary but reassuring, confirming what Clara had desperately needed to hear. The bullet had missed anything critical, the surgery had gone smoothly, and Adrian Valenti would make a full recovery. Clara was allowed in to see him an hour later, finding him pale against white hospital sheets, but undeniably, blessedly alive. His eyes finding hers the instant she stepped through the door. "Hey," he murmured, voice rough from the anesthesia. "Hey yourself." Clara crossed the room and took the seat beside his bed, gripping his hand like she never intended to let go again. "You scared me half to death. Add it to the list of things I owe you an apology for." His thumb brushed gently across her knuckles. "How's your mother?" Shaken, furious, already planning to bake something elaborate the second she's back in a real kitchen, because apparently that's how Eleanor Bennett processes trauma. Clara laughed watery and exhausted. "She's safe, Adrian. Because of you. Because of both of us," he corrected quietly. "I couldn't have done any of it without you standing right there beside me, refusing every single time I told you to stay back." "Get used to that," Clara said softly. "I don't think I know how to do it any other way anymore." Something passed between them in the quiet hospital room. Not the desperate urgency of the warehouse, not the fear of the past several days, but something steadier. Something that had been building slowly beneath the surface of every conversation since the night she'd collapsed on a marble floor and looked up into a stranger's careful, watchful eyes. "Victor confessed," Adrian said after a moment. "On record with witnesses. Marcus tells me the case against him is airtight now. 8 years, Clara. 8 years I couldn't get justice for Isabel, and it happened in a single terrible night because you refused to stay behind that fence line. You would have gotten there eventually, maybe." His eyes held hers, something vulnerable and open in them that she'd rarely seen from him. "But I don't think I would have survived it the way I did tonight, not without you there. You didn't just help me get justice for Isabel. You reminded me why I started trying to change everything in the first place." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, exhaustion and emotion finally breaking through the last of her composure. "I'm not going anywhere, Adrian," she whispered, echoing the promise he'd made her hours earlier. "Whatever comes next, whatever this becomes, I'm staying." "Good." A tired, genuine smile spread across his face, the first real ease Clara had seen in him since the crisis began. "Because I have a feeling I'm going to need considerably more convincing that being reckless and stubborn is an admirable quality, and I can't think of anyone better qualified to teach me that lesson." Clara laughed despite everything, despite the exhaustion and the fear and the enormity of the night behind them, and leaned forward to press a gentle kiss against his forehead. Careful of the IV line. Careful of everything, except the overwhelming certainty that whatever came next, they would face it exactly the way they'd faced tonight together, without hesitation, refusing to let fear write the ending for either of them. Outside the hospital window, dawn was beginning to break over Chicago, pale gold light spilling across a city that had no idea how close it had come just hours earlier, to losing something extraordinary before it had ever truly had the chance to begin. Recovery moved slower than Clara expected, and faster than Adrian wanted. He was discharged 3 days after the surgery, against the doctor's mild protest, and entirely because he refused to spend one more night staring at hospital ceiling tiles when there was a company to rebuild, and a life he suddenly urgently wanted to start living instead of merely managing. Clara drove him back to the brownstone herself, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on his knee. The entire ride, as if letting go, might somehow undo the fragile miracle of him being alive at all. "You're hovering," Adrian said, settling carefully onto the couch, wincing only slightly as his shoulder protested the movement. "I earned the right to hover. I watched you get carried out of a warehouse on a stretcher 4 days ago." Clara arranged a pillow behind him with more force than strictly necessary. "Hovering is the bare minimum." "Noted." A faint, amused smile tugged at his mouth. For the record, I don't hate it. Eleanor arrived an hour later, carrying a casserole dish large enough to feed a small army, exactly as Clara had predicted in the hospital hallway days earlier. I don't care that you have people to cook for you, Eleanor announced, setting the dish down on the kitchen counter with the authority of a woman who had raised 2 children largely on sheer stubbornness. A man doesn't recover properly on takeout. Sit down, both of you. Eat. Adrian, to Clara's quiet delight, didn't argue. He sat at the small kitchen table, slightly stiff, slightly pale, and ate Eleanor Bennett's chicken and rice like a man who hadn't tasted a home-cooked meal in years, which Clara realized with a pang was probably closer to true than not. This is extraordinary, Adrian said, and he meant it, his voice carrying none of the careful diplomacy of a man being polite to his girlfriend's mother. Well, you saved my life, Eleanor said simply. Least I can do is feed you. You don't owe me anything, Eleanor. I know I don't. She reached over and patted his uninjured shoulder, a gesture so casually maternal that Clara watched something shift behind Adrian's eyes, something that looked almost like a man remembering, or perhaps discovering for the first time what it felt like to be cared for without calculation. Doesn't mean I don't want to. That was the first mini-climax of the new chapter unfolding. Not danger, not violence, but something quieter and in some ways more disarming. A man who had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him, sitting at a small kitchen table, being fussed over by a woman who wanted nothing at all except to see him well. The weeks that followed carried their own rhythm, one built on healing rather than crisis, though the aftershocks of what they'd survived didn't simply vanish because the immediate danger had passed. Victor Kessler's arrest made headlines within days, the story breaking wide once law enforcement moved on the warehouse and the businesses connected to him. Clara watched the news coverage with Adrian one evening, both of them quiet, as anchors described the unraveling of a criminal network that had operated in the shadows of Chicago for over a decade, careful never to mention Adrian's name directly, thanks to the same careful relationships that had allowed the investigation to move forward at all. Isabel's family finally gets an answer, Adrian said quietly, watching the screen. 8 years, and they finally know what happened to her. How does that feel? He considered the question for a long moment, his hand finding Clara's on the couch cushion between them. Complicated. Relief mostly. Grief too, in a way I didn't expect, like closing a door I'd been standing in front of for so long, I forgot there was a whole house behind it. He turned to look at her. I don't think I could have gotten there without you, Clara. Not just the investigation. All of it. You reminded me a person could get close to me and survive it. I'd stopped believing that was possible. Clara leaned her head against his good shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear, and said nothing at all, because some moments didn't need more words piled on top of them. Deborah Wexler surfaced 2 weeks later, located by federal investigators in a small town 3 states away, and the news of her cooperation with prosecutors trading testimony against Kessler's network for leniency on her own charges reached Clara through Marcus, rather than through any confrontation Clara had to endure herself. She's cooperating fully, Marcus told her over coffee at the restaurant, now humming with its usual pleasant chaos around them. Facing charges but reduced ones. I thought you'd want to know. Clara sat with that information for a moment, surprised by how little anger remained where fury had once burned so hot. Do you think she regrets it? Does it matter? Maybe not. Clara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. I just keep thinking about what Adrian said that first day he offered me this job, that people who feel powerless sometimes do desperate things when someone finally offers them a way to feel powerful again, even if it's the wrong way. I think that was Deborah. Bitter, humiliated, and someone handed her $15,000 and made her feel like she mattered again for about 5 minutes. That's a generous read of someone who put your mother's life at risk. I didn't say I forgive her. Clara's jaw tightened slightly. I said I understand her. Those aren't the same thing. Marcus studied her for a moment, something like respect flickering across his usually composed face. You know, when Adrian first told me he was making a Waitress general manager of the entire restaurant group, I thought he'd lost his mind. And now I think he might be the only sane decision he's made in 8 years. Marcus smiled, standing to leave. Take care of him, Clara. He's better with you around. Everyone can see it. That evening carried its own retention hook, though Clara didn't recognize it as such until much later, a quiet conversation over dinner that would end up reshaping the entire architecture of her future without either of them fully realizing it in the moment. I've been thinking, Adrian said, setting down his fork, his shoulder healed enough now that most of the stiffness had faded from his movements. About the business. All of it. Not just the restaurants. What about it? I want to finish what I started years ago, cutting every remaining tie to anything that isn't entirely legitimate. No gray areas left. No shadows. Kessler's successor, whoever that might eventually be, could use against me or against you. His eyes held hers, serious in a way that made Clara set down her own fork. It's going to take time. Restructuring, divestment, probably some very uncomfortable conversations with people who won't be happy about losing what they think they're entitled to. But I want to do it properly this time. Completely. Why now? Because 8 years ago, I told myself I'd get there eventually, and eventually nearly cost you your mother's life. His voice roughened slightly. I'm done with eventually, Clara. I want a life I can actually build a future in without wondering every single day which shadow from my past is about to reach out and hurt someone I love. The word love sat between them unspoken, as a declaration, but undeniable as a fact, and Clara felt her chest tighten with something warm and terrifying and entirely welcome all at once. I'll help however I can, she said quietly. The restaurant group is stable now. If you need me to take on more to free up time for you to handle the rest. I don't want you to sacrifice what you've built to fix my mess, Clara. It's not sacrifice if I'm choosing it. She reached across the table, lacing her fingers through his. I told you once that you gave me a door, not a rescue. This is me choosing to walk through more of it. Together. That's different from you asking me to give something up. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Something unguarded and vulnerable passing across his face. The same expression she'd glimpsed only rarely in the hospital room, in the quiet hours after Isabel's name had finally been spoken and answered for. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. Probably not, Clara said, a teasing smile breaking through the emotional weight of the moment. But you're stuck with me anyway. He laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, the kind Clara had rarely heard from him before this entire ordeal began, and something about the sound of it settled deep into her chest like a promise finally being kept. The restructuring of Adrian's business empire took the better part of 4 months, unfolding in careful, deliberate stages that Clara watched unfold from the sidelines while managing her own steadily expanding responsibilities at the restaurant group. What had once been 3 struggling locations under Adrian's ownership became 5 thriving ones by the end of that period, each one restructured under the same principles Clara had insisted on from her very first day. Fair wages, real breaks, dignity extended to every single employee regardless of position. Mia, now 20, and considerably more confident than the terrified 19-year-old who had once dropped a tray of appetizers in front of Chicago's wealthiest investors, was promoted to assistant manager of the Aurelia's newest sister location, a moment that brought tears to Clara's eyes during the small staff celebration held in her honor. I wouldn't be standing here without you, Mia said, hugging Clara tightly after the announcement. You didn't just save my job that first night, Clara. You showed me what it looks like when someone actually has your back. I think about that every single day I manage my own staff now. You did the work yourself, Mia. I just gave you the chance to show it. That's exactly what you did for me too, Mia said. And look what it turned into. That single exchange, small as it seemed in the wider scope of everything Clara and Adrian had survived together, represented something Clara hadn't fully articulated to herself. Until that moment, the ripple effect of a single act of kindness extended outward through dozens of lives that had never known the danger unfolding quietly behind the scenes, touched only by its gentler consequences. Victor Kessler's trial began in the fall, And though Adrian was never called to testify directly, careful legal maneuvering by his attorneys kept his name largely out of the proceedings, protecting both his privacy and his ongoing safety. Clara sat beside him in a private viewing room on the day the verdict was read. Her hand gripped tight in his as the words "guilty on all counts" finally definitively closed the chapter that had defined the darkest weeks of both their lives. "It's over," Adrian said quietly, staring at the screen long after the courtroom had emptied. 8 years, and it's actually over. "It's over," Clara confirmed softly. He turned to her then, and something in his expression had shifted into a kind of clarity Clara hadn't seen in him before. Not relief exactly, though relief was certainly part of it, but something closer to a man finally standing in open air after years spent somewhere dim and enclosed. "I want to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to know I'm not saying it because of what we just watched or because of everything we survived together. I've known this for a while now. I've just been waiting for the right moment to say it properly." Clara's heart began to pound, some instinctive part of her already understanding what was coming. "I love you, Clara Bennett." His voice was steady, certain, stripped of every careful calculation she'd once assumed defined him. "Not because you saved my company, or because you helped expose Victor, or because you happened to collapse in my restaurant at exactly the right moment for me to notice you. I love you because of who you are underneath all of that. The woman who lied to protect a scared 19-year-old, who negotiated her own worth without apologizing for it, who ran into a warehouse against every reasonable instinct because she refused to let fear make her choices for her." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against her knuckles. "I have spent most of my life believing that loving someone meant eventually losing them. You've spent the last 8 months proving me wrong every single day." Clara's eyes filled with tears she didn't bother trying to hold back. "I love you too." She said the words coming easier than she'd expected true, in a way that settled the last of her old fears about trusting someone with the fragile, exhausted parts of herself she'd hidden away for years. "I think I have for a while. I just didn't know how to say it while we were both still learning how to survive everything trying to tear us apart." "We're not just surviving anymore," Adrian said quietly. "Are we?" "No." Clara smiled through her tears. "I think we're finally just living." That moment marked the deepest emotional turning point of the entire journey. But the story wasn't finished, proving itself yet, because a life built on the wreckage of danger doesn't simply become easy the moment the danger passes. It has to be built deliberately, choice by choice, and the next several months tested exactly how solid the foundation Clara and Adrian had laid together truly was. The first real test came from an unexpected direction. Not danger this time, but ordinary human doubt creeping in quietly the way it often does once the adrenaline of crisis fades and normal life resumes its steady, uncertain rhythm. Clara found herself standing in the doorway of Adrian's office one evening in early winter, watching him review contracts for the newest restaurant expansion, and something about the scene, his easy authority, the wealth surrounding him, the sheer scale of the empire he commanded, sent an old familiar insecurity crawling back up through her chest. "You're quiet tonight," Adrian said, glancing up. "Just thinking." Clara stepped inside, arms crossed loosely over her chest. "Do you ever wonder what people say about us behind our backs? The powerful businessman and his general manager, the woman who used to wait his tables before she started running his company." Adrian set down his pen, giving her his full attention immediately. "Does it matter what they say? Sometimes." Clara's voice was quieter than she meant it to be. "I spent so many years being invisible, Adrian, and now I'm visible in a way I never expected. And half the time, I still feel like the same exhausted waitress who fainted on your restaurant floor, terrified someone's going to realize I don't actually belong in the rooms I'm standing in now." Adrian rose from his desk and crossed the room, taking her hands gently in his. "Clara, look at me." He waited until she did. "You built this company's transformation with your own 2 hands. Every policy, every relationship with staff, every dollar of increased revenue, that's you, not some accident of circumstance. The people who whisper about how you got here have absolutely no idea how much harder you had to work to prove you deserve to stay. I know that logically. It's just harder to feel it some days. Then let me remind you as often as you need. His thumb traced gentle circles against her palm. You are not an imposter in this life, Clara. You built half of it yourself. And the parts you didn't build, the parts that came from me, I gave them to you because I recognized exactly how much you deserved them. Not despite where you came from, but because of who that struggle shaped you into. Clara exhaled slowly, feeling the old insecurity loosen its grip just slightly, just enough. I love you, she said again, the words still new enough to feel like small miracles every time she spoke them. I love you too, even on the days you doubt yourself, especially on those days. That quiet reassurance became something of a pattern between them. Over the following weeks, Clara's old fears surfacing unpredictably, triggered by a dismissive comment from an old acquaintance or a moment of imposter syndrome, walking into a boardroom full of investors who clearly hadn't expected the general manager to look like her and Adrian meeting each instance with the same patient, unwavering certainty. He never dismissed her doubts. He simply refused to let them define the story she told herself about who she'd become. The true resolution. The moment that finally cemented everything Clara and Adrian had built together arrived on an ordinary Tuesday evening that neither of them had planned to be extraordinary at all. Clara had just finished closing out the week's numbers at the Aurelia Revenue, up another 6% staff retention at an all-time high, a glowing review from a prominent food critic pinned proudly to the break room bulletin board, when Adrian appeared in the doorway of her office still in his work clothes, an expression on his face she couldn't quite read. Everything okay? She asked, closing her laptop. Everything's perfect, actually. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of her desk, closer than strictly professional, exactly the way he'd been doing for months now without either of them commenting on it. I got a call today, from my attorney. About the restructuring. A slow smile spread across his face. It's done, Clara. Completely done. Every gray area, every remaining connection to anything I'm not proud of, gone. As of this afternoon, Valenti Enterprises is entirely legally permanently clean. Clara stood up so fast, her chair rolled backward, and she threw her arms around him without a single moment of hesitation. Adrian, that's incredible. That's everything you've been working toward. It's everything we've been working toward, he corrected, pulling back just enough to look at her properly. You didn't just help me survive Victor Kessler, Clara. You gave me a reason to actually finish what I started years ago instead of settling for good enough. You showed me what it looks like to build something worth protecting instead of something worth hiding. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes again, an increasingly common occurrence in a life that had, against every terrible odd, turned out far softer and far more joyful than she'd ever dared hope for. So what happens now? She asked. Now that the empire is officially respectable. Now, Adrian said, reaching into his jacket pocket with a steadiness that belied the sudden nervous energy flickering behind his eyes. I do something I've been waiting months to do properly, once I could finally offer you a life that wasn't shadowed by anything dangerous. He opened his hand, and Clara's breath caught entirely at the sight of a ring resting in his palm. Simple, elegant, nothing showy or excessive. Exactly the kind of thing that told her he'd thought carefully about what she'd actually want, rather than what would look impressive. Clara Bennett. His voice shook slightly, the composed authority she'd first met all those months ago, giving way entirely to something raw and honest and utterly unguarded. I have spent my whole life either running businesses or running from the parts of myself I wasn't proud of. You are the only person who ever made me want to stop running entirely and just stay somewhere permanently, because staying with you feels like the safest thing I've ever done. He knelt slowly, careful of his healed shoulder, still holding her hand. Marry me. Not because I'm rescuing you, and not because you're rescuing me, because somewhere between a marble floor and a warehouse, and every quiet evening in between, we built something neither of us knew we needed until we found it. I want to spend the rest of my life building the rest of it with you. Clara stared down at him, at the man who had once seemed so cold and untouchable from a distance, now kneeling in her small office with his heart laid completely bare, and felt every fragment of doubt she'd ever carried about her own worth dissolve entirely into certainty. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time, pulling him up into her arms before he'd even finished sliding the ring onto her trembling finger. "Yes, Adrian, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her, then right there in the small office where she'd once negotiated the terms of a job offer that had changed the entire trajectory of her life, and Clara felt the full weight of everything they'd survived together settle into something solid and permanent and beautifully, undeniably real. The wedding took place the following spring, small and intimate, by the standards of Adrian's wealth, held in the private garden behind the very restaurant where Clara had once fainted from exhaustion and been caught by a man everyone in the city feared. Eleanor cried through the entire ceremony, seated proudly in the front row, finally completely at peace, watching her daughter marry a man who had proven beyond any doubt exactly how far he'd go to protect what he loved. Tyler served as an usher, grinning the entire time, occasionally catching Clara's eye with an expression that said everything he'd never quite found the words for: pride, gratitude, relief that his sister had finally, after years of carrying everyone else, found someone determined to carry her in return. Mia stood among the restaurant staff gathered near the back, dabbing at her eyes throughout the ceremony, later telling anyone who would listen that she'd known from that very first night Clara defended her in front of 60 wealthy guests that something extraordinary was going to come from that kindness eventually. Marcus gave a toast during the reception that made the entire garden erupt into laughter and tears in equal measure. "I've worked for Adrian Valenti for over a decade," Marcus said, raising his glass. "I've seen him build empires, dismantle threats, and survive things most people couldn't imagine surviving. But I have never, not once in 10 years, seen him as unguarded as he's been since the night a waitress collapsed on his restaurant floor and refused to let him simply rescue her without earning her respect first." He turned toward Clara, his expression warm with genuine affection. "Clara, you didn't just change his business. You gave him back the parts of himself he thought he'd lost for good. Thank you for that. All of us who care about him thank you for that." Clara raised her own glass toward Marcus, toward Eleanor, toward Mia, and the staff who had become something like family over the tumultuous, transformative months since that first terrible, wonderful night, and felt gratitude settle so deeply into her chest that words felt entirely inadequate to hold it. Later that evening, as the reception wound down, and guests began drifting toward the exits, with warm goodbyes and lingering embraces, Clara found herself standing alone with Adrian near the same corner table where he'd once watched her transform his restaurant from a distance, careful and quiet, long before either of them had admitted what was building between them. "Do you remember what you said to me?" Clara asked softly, leaning into his side as the last of the string quartet's music drifted through the warm evening air. "That first day in your office, before I even agreed to take the job. I said a lot of things that day. You said nobody was going to save me from a life I could save myself from if someone just gave me the tools to do it." Clara looked up at him, her wedding ring catching the soft glow of string lights overhead. "I think about that a lot. How true it turned out to be. You didn't save me, Adrian. You just handed me a door and trusted me to walk through it myself. And you walked through it running," Adrian said, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. "The way you do everything. Fast, fearless, and impossible to stop once you've decided something's worth fighting for." Clara laughed, the sound warm and easy, and entirely unburdened by the exhaustion that had once defined nearly every hour of her waking life. "I used to think being invisible was safer," she said quietly. "Nobody notices you. Nobody expects anything from you. Nobody has the power to disappoint you, because you never let them close enough to matter." She looked out over the garden at the family and friends who had gathered to celebrate a love neither of them had seen coming at the restaurant that had once been the site of her lowest, most humiliating moment, and had since become the foundation of everything good in her life. "But invisible isn't safe, Adrian. It's just lonely. I didn't understand the difference until you knelt down on that floor and actually saw me. I think I'd been looking for someone worth seeing for a very long time," Adrian said softly. "I just didn't know it until the moment I found her." They stood together in comfortable silence as the last guests said their goodbyes, as Eleanor blew one final tearful kiss from the garden gate, as the string lights overhead flickered gently against a Chicago sky, finally completely free of the shadows that had once threatened everything they'd built. Clara thought about the exhausted, invisible woman who had collapsed on a restaurant floor 8 months earlier, carrying the weight of an entire family alone, certain that nobody in the world had noticed her enough to catch her when she finally inevitably fell. That woman could never have imagined this. Not the wealth, not the wedding, not even the love, though all of it mattered more than she could have dreamed. What she could never have imagined was the simple, profound truth standing at the center of everything, that the moment she stopped being invisible was not the moment someone gave her value. It was the moment someone finally helped her see the value that had been there quietly, exhaustingly, unmistakably all along. Clara Bennett had spent 7 years being the woman nobody noticed unless something went wrong. She would spend the rest of her life as the woman who had proven beyond any doubt that being overlooked was never the same thing as being unworthy, and that sometimes the person everyone walks past without a second glance is exactly the person capable of changing everything for everyone. The moment somebody finally stops to look.